Call the Monday, April 8th, 2024 Rockport Select Board meeting to order. We're meeting here in the Rockport room at the library, and we have a wonderful group of residents here who've come to speak on matters they care about. The first item is we have a public hearing, a request for extension of license on premises for Sea Hag Cider. Is there anyone here from Sea Hag Cider? Great. You want to come up to the table and microphone and introduce yourself?
No, yeah, sure enough. I'm fine. Hello, everybody. I know you didn't come here. If you did, great. My name is Ryan Watts. I grew up in Thomaston, Maine, worked in southern Maine for 20 years, came home. It's an awesome opportunity to have fun and so do something great for the community. And so we moved over to Rockport, and here we are. We are Sea Hag Cider Company.
And John, I understand you are asking for outdoor seating in a fenced area starting June 1.
So we have a manufacturing license to create hard cider, or a small winery, technically. And we would like to expand into, we have this beautiful, if you guys have been over there, been to the orthodontist, you've seen my dogs. But we have this beautiful backyard, and we have had a lot of people asking to be outside. It's a popular thing to do in tasting rooms, and we could accommodate a few more people. Our parking lot's bigger than our indoor space, so we decided we'd ask to go outside. Be awesome.
And this is the public hearing portion of this, so we don't actually vote on it, but we hear from you, which we've just heard. And do we have anybody else here who wants to speak on that? Okay. And Ryan, if you have anything else you want to add?
No, I feel pretty blessed to be here. We've been talking with the town very closely, and they've been very supportive of us, and we hope to do things that help highlight the town wherever we can. So it's been really great. I work in a school, so I create community, so that's a little bit intentional. So I hope you guys come in and see what we're doing. We're having a lot of fun, and we're getting a lot of positive energy behind it. It's its own community, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay, we'll close the public hearing. And now we move into acting on the request for the extension of license on premises. And it looks like all the necessary approvals and information was provided in the application. Do we have a motion?
I don't have the officially written word, but okay, I will make a motion. I move the board approve the request for an extension of the license on premises for Sea Hag Cider, located at 315 Commercial Street.
Second. Kim? Any discussion? All those in favor? Great. Congratulations, and boy, today would have been a great day to be outside, but we'll see you after June 1.
Hopefully we can get more. Yeah, the idea to be open more.
Yeah, great. Good luck. Okay, next is the town manager's report.
Okay, well, I'll keep it short because we have a nice crowd tonight. The second half of the taxes are due next week on April 16th. Also a note, usually this time of year sort of doubles with income tax season. Some of you may have seen, but some of you may have not. Due to the fact that we are in a disaster declared area, there is some leeway given to those of us who owe income taxes. And so I would say check the IRS website, but for many people, they can file as late as June 17th without penalty. So something to provide that little bit of respite that those need. The election for June 11th is progressing. We have nomination papers available for a number of seats. Nomination papers are due on Friday, April 12th at 3 o'clock. And we've got obviously storm damage, every time I just seem to talk about storm damage. It's like, it should be the storm damage report rather than the town manager's report. Again, there's still a lot of damage. We will be working towards I think will be considered interim repairs on a lot of that work to allow us to move into the season without people feeling like they're going to fall in a hole. But it's by far and away not a long-term fix, because for us to provide those long-term fixes that would really actually provide a repair, we need FEMA to in fact buy in on the solution we want to apply, and that the engineers and everyone else would need to sign off on that. So I would expect over the next few weeks, you'll see those repairs coming to the harbor, and then there'll be probably more waves of people from FEMA coming by and looking at the same pile of dirt over and over and over again, until they finally agree that that pile of dirt could look like something else that all of us probably in this room would agree is a better solution than the one that the pile of dirt we had to throw in its place. But that's the way the system works. So we'll work through that. Some of you probably have been out on Main Street. Great deal of work has been undertaken on that stretch of road to cut back and try to open things up in preparation for some more road work, culvert replacements and the like along that stretch of road for this summer. Great job by the Public Works crew to start tackling that. At the same time, trying to juggle in between storms, and it may sound simple, but when you have all your trucks ready to plow snow and then you need to use the same trucks to brush cut, that can be a challenge. And so our crew is doing a really good job of sort of balancing living in both worlds. We've had a number of different projects, and probably the one that I would probably notice that who's been out by the 1790 intersection is walls are starting to go up pretty quickly on the West Rockport Fire Station. We had our plumbing inspection done for internal plumbing in the floor, so that project is moving ahead swimmingly, and again, still on pace for a fall opening. So fingers crossed on that note. And I think that's about it right now.
And the footbridge is still on track? to be-
Footbridge, yep, still working towards that, again,
May
middle of May.
15th.
So that's the goal. Abby's been working very hard on that, and Mike and Glenn. So we've got sort of all hands trying to get that in place so people can go back on their normal walking routes that they've been using for years, so.
Great. And we'll have the final presentation on the VPI study April 22nd? That's what
Yep.
it says in here? Okay.
April 22nd, and then that final study will then come back to the board at your May meeting.
Okay.
So there's sort of an interim for the group to look at it, and then it will come back to the board in
Okay.
May.
24th.
That's what I was thinking, it was the
what I
24th. I saw 22nd in your report, but,
I'll look.
okay. That'll be on the-
24th, 10:30.
Okay, yep. All righty, great, thank you.
Just a question, on the footbridge, is that a temporary solution, or is that going to be semi-permanent, or wait and see?
I would say that it's more temporary than permanent. When the footbridge was taken out, there was great hope that we could find a solution working with a couple people who had offered to pitch in. Engineering became a bit of an issue, and getting the structural side to where the town could feel confident that the work could be stamped. So we took an alternative approach. I do think that there's a bit of an issue, obviously, with height, right? How high should the footbridge be when you have sea level rise 3 feet coming so, and in fact, we had some of those storms in the fall. We were getting pretty close, to the bottom of that bridge, if not lapping against it. So we really needed to be thinking about moving up, but in the face of potentially a larger study of some things, it doesn't seem like putting a whole bunch of money into where it would go right now, when 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, we might be working towards a different solution. Doesn't
Okay.
seem very, very smart, so. It's sort of it's kind of an in-between approach, I'd say.
Any other questions for John? All right, move on to public input on non-agenda items. Taylor?
Just a question.
Yes.
So a bunch of us are here around sewer issue?
Yes.
Where on the agenda would you like us?
That's going to be under discussion items and item B there, WRF project discussion.
Okay,
And then
thank you.
we'll allow both, whoever is here to talk. Okay, and then any amendments to the agenda? Next is our consent agenda. Do we have a motion?
Let's see.
I move the board approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second?
I'll second.
Okay. Any discussion? And
I
this
just wanna-
consent agenda is approval of the minutes from our last meeting and then Benjamin Lance's resignation from the budget
I just
committee.
wanted to specify that part, yep.
Yep.
That he was there, okay.
Okay, all those in favor? Great. And thank you to Benjamin for serving on the budget committee. I think his term was going to be up this June anyway, but he resigned, and so we're always looking for new budget committee members. And thanks for his service. I think this was a particularly difficult budget session with a lot of long, late-night meetings, both for our select board and the budget committee members. So we have some town residents and volunteers who've really given their all for the town, and we really appreciate that. Next are our discussion items. First up, and I'm just going to use the term WRF, W-R-R-F. It stands for Water Recovery, see? No, I can't even. Water Resource Recovery Facility. But it's so much shorter to just call it that. You can also call it a sewage treatment plant, but WRF is really going to be the term we'll be using tonight. So first item is the task force's final report. And I think Bill Bowe and Megan Brackett are going to come up and provide that information to us. And John, feel free to weigh in if you want to make any opening comments on this.
Yeah, so just to maybe set the stage for this, so at the board's last meeting in March, the WRF task force reported out the majority of its recommendations. There were some conversations, even apart and prior to that, through the public meetings that occurred at the Opera House, about some desire to look further at the financial pieces of the puzzle. And so nothing else is changed about the other versions or the other pieces of this report that were discussed at the March meeting. Really, this is really just dialing in on the financials tonight. So everything else has been reported out. This is the last piece, and after that, their work is done.
Okay, great. Let you guys present the information.
Well, I'll start briefly, but then this is Megan's show.
Okay,
As John mentioned, we did promise to look more carefully at the financials and looked at the models. And as a result of that, we did a bunch of modifications to the models that some forced the economics one way and others forced the economics the other way. They're all listed in this memo that I believe you probably have from Megan. They do. That show the changes that we made. I wasn't planning to go through any of these. I'm just saying that this is the list of stuff that we did to adjust it at some level. And the only thing I would mention is then that the resultant economics that Megan's going to discuss involves some additional work on escalation rates and what Camden might be charging in X year going forward. That's really outside the purview of what we looked at as a task force, so that's why the handoff has just occurred.
All right, so in terms of the financials really highlight the fact in doing the WRF along with the Route 90 sewer extension project, that mostly is because without any development on Route 90, even just the existing users on Route 90, you'd be adding more users to the system, which is then helping to offset some of those newborn costs. It's presumed that within 10 years of any extension that there's a 90% take rate, which means once a line crosses in front of your property, about 90% of those property owners connect to the system within the first 10 years. For the purposes of these financial models, we assumed a 70% take rate. So being a little bit more conservative on the number of people that are gonna hook up. When you look down Route 90, a lot of those homes are older in nature, so assuming that they would have septic systems fail before a new construction area, I think it's reasonable to think that there'd be a 70% take rate within the first 10 years. So we looked at that in terms of the no development model, and then as most know, there has been a development planned on Route 90 up towards the 17 intersection for many years, which seems to be waiting for sewer. So we looked at models where 50% of that project was done in addition to a 70% take rate, and then 100% of that project being complete in addition to a 70% take rate for the properties that are already on Route 90. So those are basically the four model. There's a do nothing option, so keep our contracts of Camden and Rockland, and then those other four options there. Camden announced at one of their budget meetings last week or the week before that they will be proposing a $12.5 million bond in June, which according to the manager would do 2 extensions to their system, as well as fix some of their inflow and infiltration or II issues. Later, you'll see that Bill has put a lot of work into evaluating II issues, and we don't feel that the efforts that they're taking is going to be all that it's going to take to fix their II issues. So in this model, we presumed the $12.5 million bond passes, and then we also presumed that they would have to do another $10+ million bond. So that was all built in to the Camden treatment rates, because as the structure is now, Rockport would be responsible for whatever rate they're charging to their base users, which would have to include any of the debt that they take on. So that is included in this model. For Rockland, it was harder to estimate what their capital investment is going to take. We do know that they have a stormwater issue that they are trying to deal with. What the cost of that is and how the cost of that would be passed on is really unknown at this point. So we did a slightly higher annual increase built into their rate to be more on the conservative side, to not artificially inflate their rate, but I feel like their rate could potentially be higher depending on how they decide to deal with their own issues in their plant. So those are basically the assumptions that we made around the rates, the users, the increased flow to the system, which then basically produces the graph that's included in this letter memo that I gave you. So the wharf only option still presents a savings over 10 years to Rockport ratepayers. I'm sorry, does not present a rate savings, but the rate would go down over the 10-year period. So in year one, they would be looking at about a $670 increase in their bill. And by year 10, over the Camden option, it would be an increase of $202 in their bill. If we do the Route 90 extension with no development, so just assuming the 70%
Megan,
take
can
rate.
I just stop you for a minute? So when you're comparing the no Route 90 extension with the base case, is that?
Correct.
And so by year 10, then there is a savings. Year 10 compared the no.
There's no savings, but the increase is lower. So the increase in year one is $670 to an annual user. By year 10, it's $202. So it doesn't drop as dramatically because you don't have as many people paying into the system. You would just have your current users. Which, I mean, we've added all those users into the equivalent users with the Route 90 Route 1 extension. There aren't a ton of users to gather unless there's development on Route 1 or the extension that we have on Route 90 already. So then if we look at the wharf with Route 90 and then the 70% take rate, assuming no new development.
Oh, what I'm wondering, all of a sudden, excuse me, Jeff, do you have a way of,
If you email it to me, but it wasn't part of the package I had for today.
It's in the packet.
It's in the
It's
package.
this page right here.
Can you tell me what page?
I
30.
can't.
I'm sorry, I just assumed it was up on the monitors, and then I realized everybody's looking going,
Annual cost for, thank you,
You got it.
and you go push the button, push this button.
There we go.
Okay. So, Route 90 with the 70% take rate, no new development assumed. Ratepayers in year one would see an increase in their bill of about $540, and by year 10, they would see a net savings of about $480 in their bill. So, you can see that debt go down. Usage goes up a little bit, which helps with the 70% take rate. It helps offset those costs a little bit. But we also structure our debt so that we pay level principal payments, which means our payments decrease annually based on those. And then if we look at Route 90, with 50% of the proposed development completed, in year one, it would be an increase to the average user of about $340 a year, but by year 10, there would be a savings estimated of $721 per user. And then if we look at the wharf, Route 90, 100% of the development on Route 90 as proposed being completed. It would be an increased average cost to the user of about $230 in year one, and then an annual cost savings of $913 by year 10. I did put this in the memo, but these estimates are done based on the information that we had at this point. These numbers can change as we get more information from Camden and Rockland. They could change once we get into construction-ready documents, if we get to that point, getting the project bid out if it gets to that point. So there's a lot of things along the way that could cause us to update these estimates, but these are based on the information that we have today.
great. Any questions for Megan? Go ahead.
Can I ask a question?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. I'm sorry. When you talk about the rates being higher and then just...
If you guys would please wait for the mic so people at home can have a chance to hear. Hi, Mike.
Megan, I'm sorry, when you're talking about
Well,
these
if you could
rates
introduce
being-
yourself, just,
I'm sorry.
we know who
Vic
you are, but-
Steinglass, live in the village. On these rates, when you're talking about them being at such a level now and over the 10 years, are we talking about people on Route 90 or all sewer users?
All sewer users pay the same rate. So it doesn't matter where you are, your usage rate is the same, which is based on how much fluid is going through your pipes, generally based on how much water is coming into your house from main water. If you are not on public water, then there's a formula that the codes department uses to estimate your well usage, and then your usage is based on that. And then all users, when either the sewer line goes by your house, the code office assigns what's called an equivalent user to your property, which is based on the number of bedrooms and baths, or if you're a business, there's a formula in the ordinance that outlines how that's charged. There's a base debt service fee that's charged to each equivalent user. So if your house has 2 equivalent users, then you're charged double the base fee, based on the size.
What is an equivalent user?
It's the code that we assign to that formula that the codes department uses to figure out based on the size, or like the school district, for example, there's a whole formula that we go into based on number of students, a number of teachers, bathrooms, things like that, just to make sure that it's equitable across all users.
But typically, a household would be one
One.
equivalent user.
Yep.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Scott?
Way down
Oh.
there.
Richard,
Oh, Richard,
that was way.
pass the mic.
Go long.
Hi, Scott Gazal. I live in the village as well. I'm just curious on the models that assumed either 50% or 100% of the new construction. When did you assume that would be done by?
So all of these estimates start in fiscal year ending 2028, so essentially 4 years from now. And then our hope would be that construction on those, if we have the approval to go forward with the plan, that the construction and moving forward with those developments would happen once this has passed, because it's my understanding that they're essentially waiting for this to pass. So our hope is, in these models, that they would work in tandem to our project.
And if it was delayed, does that affect your conclusions at all?
In the 50 and 100%, it would, but we did escalate those throughout the 10 years in terms of how many people would be active. Like, it's not 50% year one. I think we did 10% a year.
Yeah, it was
for 10 years.
10% over 10 years to get to that assumed maximum.
So it would affect it slightly if they were a couple years delayed, but it wouldn't have a major impact.
Did you mean, Scott, if the sewer project is delayed or the housing
No,
project?
The housing project.
Okay.
The number of users, basically.
Okay. Anything else, Megan or Bill, on that
That was
one?
pretty much it. Unless you have any
Great.
questions.
Well, thank you both. And I have to say thank you again to the task force members. Sam Clark is here, and of course, Bill Bowe, for the many hours of work on this and for the wonderful work you've done to carefully analyze the important option for the town on the WRF project. And that will ultimately help our sewer users, as these financial models show. At this point, the work of the task force is concluded. So we formed a task force, they did their work, and that work is done. We've received some additional information from some of the task force participants. Do you want to say something, Sam?
I do, actually, real quick. I
Okay.
was actually told that the task force was dissolved prior to this meeting, so I didn't know we were going to be here in an official capacity.
Oh,
That said, I have a
Okay.
couple of things that I wanted to make sure were said publicly.
Great.
Which I didn't feel like I was getting that opportunity from having this kind of close out beforehand. So, that said, the stuff that we just talked about, the stuff that we stood up in front of during the public meetings and said, these are the numbers, when we actually got a chance to look at them, we realized that those numbers weren't right. Now, these guys have worked on making sure that whatever that is has been changed. However, I can't get the methodology to work backwards, right? Like, I can't come up with what our user rate is based off of what that is, based off of what that spreadsheet uses for equations. You base it off of the amount of flow that we have, the user rate that we've used, like all the stuff that's in that model, you put it back in and try to come up with what this year's user rate would be, and it doesn't come out what it comes out to. It comes out lower than what our user rate is. I wanted to check that against the budgets, but the last budget that was posted online was 2021. So I don't really have any kind of way to look at
Well, I
this in
think
a way that
Megan
would
is
work
happy,
it.
I mean, if you, I don't
I
know about
understand
the
that, but publicly
posting.
available is my piece, right? Like being able to match it against what's there, and you go to the website, and we stopped posting the wastewater budgets in 2020. I don't know why, but I can't access it to see how this thing goes up against it. What we did realize during our last meeting, and we did have a bit of a contention as to whether or not this was inside of our remit. Now, I don't have the expertise in order to say this is exactly how you move out from year one to year 10 on a municipal bond. I get that. But it should work, right? It's just math. You should have an equation. You should be able to put in the pieces and have it come out the way it's supposed to come out. It's not. Like, I don't know how to make that work, but what it does say is that whatever's going on with the methodology isn't quite right. That is what I wanted to say, and then instead I kind of got pitched off, and the task force was ended prior to this meeting. And I was told I wasn't going to have anything to be able to say because we weren't talking in an official capacity.
Well, certainly not from the select
Well,
board.
this was the piece. This is
Because
actually
we
part of
appointed the task
our.
force, and we've been,
I understand. When we were going through this with the task force via email, I very specifically said I wanted to be able to come back in here and talk in an official capacity, and I was outvoted 3-1, right? Like, we have those emails. I can happy to forward them along.
well,
But my point of this is that it doesn't match up. The methodology that we're using isn't working, and maybe if we get the different numbers and you get somebody across to look at it that comes through, but having somebody with the knowledge around this look at it from a third-party point of view is not the worst thing in terms of trying to figure out if we're getting ready to spend $40 million if we've got everything right. We went through and spent a year making sure that the engineering on it was right, because when we first looked at it, it didn't seem right. We looked at it, sure enough, there was things that were wrong. We looked at this for the first time, looking at it inside the equation, it didn't look right. I don't understand why we wouldn't take more time to make sure that what we're looking at matches. That is what I wanted to say.
Are you speaking specifically just to the numbers in this newest thing? So, I mean, is it better? It sounds like it would be worse.
I mean, that's the piece. Like, right now, I can't tell because I don't know.
Okay.
There's a lot of little things, and when you add them all up, I don't know if they add up to something big or if they don't. And nobody here can agree on it. Well, nobody in our group could agree on that.
Well, I think it's fair to say that three of us agreed, right?
Right, well, okay.
But that's
There
all.
you go.
Along with our town's finance director. I'm not saying that
No,
you're
and
not
I
raising.
understand
any-
that, but everybody here was ready to put this on the ballot a year ago with the cost being half as much and the O&M being a tenth, right? Like,
Well, that's not accurate, Sam.
this is why we formed the task force, so that it wouldn't, right? Like, that was
Right,
kind
we
of the point.
listened, and this is the action we took,
But
and
if
we had
nobody had
professionals.
stood up and said anything, right, that task force wouldn't have been formed. And my point behind this is the same thing. Somebody standing up and saying, this doesn't sound right, doesn't look right. What you do with that information is up to you. I'm saying this is what we found.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
So that hat's off now, right?
Yep.
Okay.
So we've got some additional information that we received a memo this afternoon for some additional extra work, analysis of issues that relate to the next item on the agenda, which is the just general discussion of the WRF item as, is proposed to be put onto the ballot. Bill, do you want to just summarize the information in this memo?
Sure.
Which I think will sort of set a context for everyone as we hear public comment.
Okay, thank you. So, once the task force work was largely complete, and I'm talking about a week ago, several of us sat down to look at trying to understand a little bit about Camden's position. In other words, we've all heard the various things that, we can't get along, or the negotiation went poorly, or whatever it is that you want to look at. We sat down and tried to better understand, based on our experience, what was driving Camden to say what they're saying, to try and understand that a little bit more, sort of the seek to understand before you seek to be understood mentality. So we sat down and looked at that a little bit. And a memo, as Denise mentioned, was submitted to the select board a few hours
There's some
ago.
extra copies if anybody would like.
Yeah, and then we can, I think we talked about posting it on the WRF website, so it's available to everybody. So it'll be, but to be clear, there's three of us that worked on this. It was myself, Bob Colmar, and Doug Cole. And Bob and Doug are off chasing.
This just came out?
Just came out, hot off the press.
This afternoon.
Nobody gets a chance to even see it before we discuss it.
Well, I think.
This is what we're doing.
Yeah, this is.
Yeah, exactly.
What we're doing.
We're trying to get information as fast as we can, and when we get it, we distribute it. So go ahead, Bill.
Bob and Doug are off chasing the eclipse, so they're not here. But so to be clear, sort of from the outset, we're recommending, the three of us, this is not the task force. I want to be extremely clear about this. We are the citizens that were on the task force, we have some knowledge of this, and we did some analysis of this data. We're recommending to the select board that the warrant article gets put and placed and approved, so that Rockport voters have the opportunity to approve it. But we also do believe that it's worth another attempt to talk to Camden. We need to engage in further discussions. And if you look at it from a practical perspective, when the WRF is approved in June, we're going to do a lot of preliminary work that needs to be done at relatively low expense. That's things like project plans, negotiating with Penn Bay Medical Center, funding mechanisms, and engineering firm contract, that sort of thing. It's not going to be, and that's going to take 2, 3, 4, 5 months to complete. So during that time, there's going to be a relatively low expenditure of funds, and we are suggesting that we should be talking with Camden during that period of time to try and attempt to renegotiate a contract in whatever way, shape, or form we feel is appropriate. And we talked about that a little bit. I'll get to that. Or consider the mud, whatever it is. So what we're trying to set is a date of October 31st, Halloween, if you will, to say, look, that's 6 months from now. We should be able to have a conversation with Camden, should they be willing, and that's a question, to try and get an agreement put together that works for everybody, okay? So how do you define that? So I put together, we have these 5 guiding principles that are in the memo, and you can read them to your heart's content. But the 2 most important ones are fair price and increased capacity. We need to make sure, you know, I want to make a point that it's not appropriate that Rockport's users should agree to remain on Camden's system regardless of cost. I've had that said to me directly by individuals, and we simply do not agree with that. We need to get a fair price. And the other thing that we need is we need allocated capacity. If we're going to try and grow the community, we need the sewer. We've talked about that a little bit out Route 90. We need that allocated capacity, and I'll get to that in a minute. But those are the 2 most important things, fair price and allocated capacity. So to better understand Camden's requirement that Rockport leave their system, I spent some time looking and analyzing their historical wastewater budgets and flow data. And Jeff, if you can pop that up on the screen, that'd be great. So this is a graph that I want to make exceedingly clear that this is a high-level analysis of Camden's flows and the economic impact from it. And it's not intended to be a, it's for the purpose of evaluating alternatives. It's not a detailed engineering analysis. I can't make that clear enough, okay? So what this is, I want to describe this graph briefly, is if you look at it, it's the gallons per day flow rate on the y-axis going up and down the left. And it's time from 2016 out through 2023. There's no data, actually data is available through September of 23. There's no data available past that. So that's the time frame. The green line is Rockport's average daily flow. And that's roughly 75,000 gallons per day. Now that's taken from monthly data divided by the number of days in that particular month. And so that's the gallons per day for that particular line. That's the green line there. The red line is Camden's, what I'm calling total daily paid flow. In other words, that's flow that they're getting paid to treat. And I calculated that by looking at their budget, their annual wastewater budget, divided by the rate, the dollars per gallon. It's not gallon, but it's close enough for this discussion. So if you take the total amount they need, you take the rate that they decide that they need to get that total amount of money, that gives you a volume of wastewater that they intend to treat that year. So that's one number for the whole year. You divide that by 365 and you get a flow rate. And I did that for each subsequent year, 2016 through 2023. And you can see that red line is remarkably consistent, and that's not unexpected. You know, you're treating roughly the same amount of water every year, and even though the budgets went up and the rate went up, the division as far as the amount of water stays relatively flat, slightly over 400,000 gallons a day, about 425 roughly. So that's how much they're being paid to treat, all right? Now the black line is what they're actually treating and discharging to the harbor on a daily basis, averaged per month. So they have to report every month to the EPA, pursuant to their permit, how much water they treated. So you divide that volume by the number of days in that particular month, and you have a daily rate for that particular month. So that black line is what they're dealing with on a monthly average basis, each month from that period, from 2016 through 2023. The difference, the gray shading, is inflow and infiltration. In other words, it's not what they're getting paid to treat, but it's what they're treating, okay? Because that's what's going through their plant, and that's what they're telling everybody that's going through their plant. The dotted line is their permitted average flow limit. In other words, that's the max that they can have on an average daily basis. It's 1.2 million gallons per day. So you can see that throughout that period of time, they had a number of spikes that went above that average daily permitted flow limit. And this is not including, to be very, very clear, it does not include their max flow. Their max flow is when they have an extreme event over 2 or 3 days during a month. It rains 5 inches. We've all sat through them over the past few years. And that results in a max flow, run that's even higher than the daily average that's the black line. So trying to understand, okay, what's driving them to want our water off their system, okay? So, once you sort of look at that, it appears that Camden has a very significant and likely expensive, and that's no shock, inflow and infiltration problem. And that includes an ongoing legal enforcement matter with the Maine DEP. The DEP executed a settlement agreement, or a consent agreement as it's called, with the town in September of 2021. And that agreement says, among other things, they had to pay for a project in Aldermere Farm. But it also says, you got 3 reports you got to give us about your inflow and infiltration. We want to know what you're going to do to look for it, and then what you found when you found it. And they had 3 reports. And those reports were due sometime in 2022. Now, there's lots of reasons that when you sign settlement agreements with agencies, because I've done it a lot of times over the years, that reports don't get generated in accordance with the schedule for very legitimate reasons. So I'm not trying to suggest that, they did or didn't do the reports, or that they did or didn't do it was a nefarious thing. That they may or may not exist. I've asked for them. I've asked to see if I could find them. I've looked on the EPA website, the EP website. I reached out. I don't have them. So I don't know what's causing that gray line. But that's what's causing, I believe that it's the reason that they're telling us they don't want our flow. So when you hear things, like Camden has the capacity, that they're simply unwilling to allocate it, it's not true. They don't have it. And that graph shows you why. And their legal enforcement matter also tells you why. So they have a problem they need to figure out, okay? They're also operating an old plant, and they've publicly expressed a desire to extend the outfall further into the harbor. Their outfall right now is right in front of Peter Ott's restaurant, and they're pumping that, those peak flows out literally right in the inner harbor. And I understand why they may want to push it out further. That's not an unreasonable thing to want to do. But we also I saw during my career lots of municipal plants that were in this kind of condition. They were 50-plus years old and been, probably under invested into, and I'm not imputing anything to Camden. I'm not saying it was a bad thing. It's just typical that these old plants operate and they have trouble keeping going. And we were asked as engineering firms to potentially assume operation of these old plants for a fixed fee. And a lot of us went into these things and looked at them and realized we couldn't do it because the capital investment needs were so high that it just wouldn't be an acceptable thing, because these municipalities were realizing that they're having trouble keeping them operating. So they were asking people to look at it. So, then you ask yourself, all right, I've got an old plant. They've already committed to spending $12.5 million on I&I, and they have an old plant as well. How much of that needs to be spent? Certainly some of it's for I&I. I don't really know. But if you look at Camden's strategy, really to address their I&I liabilities, it appears to be a combination of spending, the recent $2 million, we all saw Free Street and the other one torn up for the summer, the $12.5 million bond that they're seeking now, which I'm sure includes some I&I management. They're requiring, us to disconnect from their system. And I think that's their philosophy. They're simply saying that if we can do this, get rid of Rockport's flow, and we can spend a little bit of money, then maybe we won't have to make any significant, investments into the plant in the future. And I don't know if that's true or not, okay? But it's a question that we need to understand. So, if you think you're hearing that Camden's executing a short-term strategy to try and manage a potentially very high-cost, long-term liability that's not fully quantified or at least shared with us, you're right. That's what they're doing. And I understand it. It's nothing wrong with that strategy. They're simply saying, get the flow out, and we're going to spend a little bit of money, and maybe we won't have to do a whole bunch more. So, in an effort to try and understand that. But without more information, we don't really want a part of that under the terms of the now expired agreement, so we can't really in good conscience recommend that we take that bet. That's just not something that we think we should do. As Megan showed, building our own WRF is probably a lower cost and lower risk alternative that puts us in control of our own wastewater. and our economic future. But at any rate, so summarizing, we think we should get the warrant article put in. We think the voters should approve it. It's an economically viable plan that gives Rockport the opportunity to cost-effectively treat our own wastewater and allow for development at the same time, protect and enhance human health in the environment, and also has that resilience opportunity we talked about at the hospital. Remember, for every 5,000 gallons we can get the hospital to use less 5,000, that's 30 homes, all right, or 15 to 30 homes, depending on the volumes. So, you know, and hospitals currently using 25 to 30,000, so if we can get them to cut back 15, 20% in their flow. The other thing you have to remember is that we've learned through this process that Mirror Lake, which is all of our drinking water supply, has to get filled up every August from Grassy because there's not enough water in Mirror to go for the existing demand, let alone future. So we have a resilience issue there. So if we can somehow turn that around to some sort of savings on the wastewater side, we may be able to sustain that resource a bit longer and also use it for some economic development within the community. I mean, none of this is easy. I'm just putting this out there as a discussion point. So, again, it's a sound plan. I think we should get it on the ballot. I also think that we should be discussing it with Camden and see if we can't, within the next 6 months, come to an agreement that we can all be happy with. It's not that hard. I mean, coming up with an agreement between the two communities isn't something that should take years to figure out. It's just not that complicated. You just have to have two parties that both have something to gain. And I'm not sure we have that here. So that's what I wanted to do. Now, this memo will be posted, and I'm happy to take any questions. So.
Any questions for Bill?
I think, I don't have any at the moment. I like it. Thank you.
Great.
That clarified.
Yeah, thank you, Bill, for those thoughts and all the work you've done to develop the information in the graph, which does explain some of what we've been hearing, it helps put that in context. It's helpful factual summary. And it's also helpful to make the point that a vote in favor of the treatment plant is not a vote against continuing to discuss mutually beneficial options with Camden. That can be done in the 4 to 5 month sort of time frame you discussed after voter approval without slowing down the treatment plant, or if discussions with Camden are successful without incurring unnecessary costs for the treatment plant. It's sort of a best of both worlds. We can approve the treatment plant, and yet we can also continue discussions with Camden. Thank you.
Okay,
Next on the agenda is a discussion item concerning the WRF.
Hey, hold on.
Oh, excuse me. Oh, I'm sorry, I missed it.
Sorry.
No, I'm sorry, I just didn't see it. Go ahead.
Microphone, here it comes.
Thank you. My name is Taylor Allen. I have a business in town and live in town, and have been here for some time. I had prepared remarks to say, but I think I'm going to skip that. I was part of 35 years ago when Rockport didn't have a sewage system. DEP required us to get one, and there was an impetus to build a plant in town. A lot of us objected to that. We ended up with an agreement with Camden that worked for 30 plus years to share with sewage. It's really discouraging to me to hear Camden portrayed in the way that I just heard Bill portray it. I don't believe that's their attitude at all. Frankly, with that kind of an attitude, I'd be surprised if Camden would even want to talk to us. So what we're going to propose, what we hope you all would support, is the idea that a standalone system for Rockport does not go on the June ballot, and a citizens group from both Camden and Rockport come together to look into the details of what it would look like for the two towns to cooperate. It strikes me that it's a fairly complicated issue. You know, the task force has done a good job in a few months or a year to come up with what they've done, but we don't have anything to compare it to. And I don't believe that the select boards have the time, given what else is on their agenda, to really research something like this. So we would really advocate that a citizens group be formed to dig into it, make recommendations to both select boards, who could then act on make their own decisions on how to act. So thanks.
Okay, thanks, Taylor. Okay, any questions for Bill, I guess?
Yes,
is
I have a
where we are
question
now.
for Bill. I'm Philip Conkling. I'm a resident of Camden. I was a longtime resident of Rockport before moving to Camden. Bill, I appreciate your presentation, which I haven't had time to absorb because I just got it. I've been involved in wastewater decisions and, community processes up and down the coast of Maine for over 30 years. It looks like your analysis is very interesting. And you have suggested kind of where you think Camden is, where their priorities are in terms of dealing with their issues. I just want to know, have you talked to any of their wastewater treatment people or their community leaders to reality test the assumptions you've made about where they're coming from?
Yeah, and I thank you for that question, Philip. And by the way, I live in your house, so yeah, I know you used to live in Rockport.
Any complaints about the?
Yes, this is an intimate conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So, no, I did reach out. I shot an Audra an email about a week ago, and again, this I just pulled together because this was not part of the task force's remit. So we stayed away from it deliberately because we didn't want anything pushing us one direction or another. So my effort here was to try and understand where they're coming from. It wasn't to pass judgment on what they're doing. And it wasn't to say to them, look, you're doing the wrong thing. It's just trying to understand what it is.
Yes,
And
but just to interrupt, to understand where they're coming from, doesn't somebody need to talk to them?
Yes.
From,
And
from a professional point of view, such as yourself, who is obviously very capable of understanding all of these technical complexities that both towns are dealing with. So I don't understand why you didn't reach out.
As a former
did.
environmental lawyer, I would not let my client talk about all those permitted exceedances. I'm just saying, I think that there is an issue here that these are just published EPA reports, but it does demonstrate that over sort of a consistent period of time, Camden is exceeding its permitted limit.
But Philip, to your point, you're quite right. We need to talk to them, and I'm advocating that we talk to them. And I've reached out initially, but was not met with a response, and I kind of understand why. We're sort of at a high level of discussion here. And I wrote in the memo multiple places you'll see where these are assumed numbers that can be improved by input from Camden, which we should get. I also don't think we need a year to figure it out either. That's my point.
I'll just say, you're advocating for a position here that, something goes on the ballot and you're saying you've made a whole lot of assumptions. That to me is questionable as a strategy. If you've made assumptions
Excuse
and
me, I
you're
want to interject here. I think
for
we're
a
getting
position,
Stop, Philip, please. Okay, we're moving on to a discussion item about the WRF project and whether, at this point, we just want to hear from people who are here to speak. And I think Bill's done his...
Are you done with questions?
I think so, because I'm not hearing any real questions, just assertions. And I think it's important to just try to keep this civil. We're all trying to come up with the best decision for Rockport, and it's not always easy. I mean, we might feel strongly about these things, and I think people do, as we're hearing. But it's a big deal for Rockport, and we've been working hard on this for 5 years. So let's just sort of... Can I ask you a question? Yes, Martha.
Isn't it also true that you could look at that same chart and come to the point of view that if Rockport were working with Camden and helping to solve the problem of their I&I, that there would be more capacity for Rockport, and that the green line that you show at the bottom of the chart seems to me to clearly show that Rockport's input into the system is not their problem. You seem to suggest that their motivation is to get rid of Rockport so that they don't have to solve their problem. Getting rid of Rockport is not going to solve their problem. I can't imagine that they don't understand that. But if we stayed in the system with them and help to solve the problem of a system we've been part of for 30 years, wouldn't that also create more capacity and solve our problem as well as theirs? Plus be a little more neighborly in the process.
Yes.
Okay, so all I'm saying
I mean,
is,
you and I are in
your
violent agreement.
motivation, the motivation you're ascribing to them is an assumption. There could be a very different way of looking at it. I don't look at that chart and see it the way you do. You're suggesting that that might also be true.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
my point here is I'm trying to understand before we just say this is the way it has to be. So I agree with you. If you look at the green line, it's not a big piece of their flow.
Right.
Okay, I get it.
Right, and I
Right.
think they do too.
So, well, that's a question, right?
Well,
You know?
You assume one way, I assume the
Yeah.
other.
Right.
But my point is, it would behoove us to find out before we put a $40 million item on the budget. I mean, the idea of going in both directions at once, putting a ballot item on that's going to commit a bond in great numbers, and then maybe trying to work something out with Camden, as we've not done a very good job doing so far, strikes me as an odd way to go about it.
I'd like to just interject for a second, and I don't want to become a lightning rod, but I've just watched replays of 2 of Camden's Select Board meetings, one from September of this past year and one from December. And those meetings, to sum it up, were very, very confusing because it seemed like they were contradicting themselves at different times. So I think Bill's assumption analysis of the graph might not be coming from a vacuum. I mean, there have been times when the Camden Select Board members have said, why do we need Rockport? We don't need them. Why should we be doing this? We have our own problems. Like, if we get them out of here, you know. So these things have been said in their meetings, and I think that is part of the reason why we have been feeling that we need to pursue the potential for our own. If they were saying in a very concise manner, God, we know we need Rockport's money. We know we need their sewage flow to help make our system work right. These things would make sense to say, we don't need our own. But right now, we have not gotten any inkling from anybody of a clearly defined direction that they would like to go with us. Yeah.
Thank you, Michael.
My name is Stuart Smith. I'm not a resident of Rockport. I'm a resident of Camden. I own businesses in both towns, and I don't want to call a spade, but the group that started this issue was not the Camden Select Board. It was a past Rockport Select Board. They're the ones that refused to pay. They're the ones that put the thing into court, they being the Rockport Select Board. So if I was sitting on the Camden Select Board, I wouldn't be sending Valentines to the Rockport Select Board. Yeah. So I think you need to look in the mirror a little bit and say, what caused this problem? And I would go back to your Woodward and Curran people that gave you terrible advice about how much you should be paying. And that's been proven that they made a huge error when they talked about what the cost should have been. So Woodward and Curran is not the group that I would be using to base anything on. They're the ones that put us into this situation in the first place. Now, I've talked to all the Camden Select Board. I've talked to Audra. They are very, very willing to work with Rockport. And I would suggest getting some sort of a committee away from both select boards and get 3 or 4 people from Rockport, 3 or 4 people from Camden that are interested in the sewer system and interested in giving the citizens of both towns an equitable, reasonable sewer system. It is absolutely ridiculous to build another sewer plant 5 miles away from one that's perfectly well working, and you can improve and make it work better. It's $40 million of wasted money.
I want to correct the number. I know that's sort of the least of the issues here, but it's the bond issue is for 33 million.
So are we basing that on Woodward and Curran? And then with 33 million today, by the time you get to this thing, it'll be a $50 million project.
All right, I'm not going to quibble on the numbers with you.
Well,
thank you for the comments.
but you can't use Woodward and Curran.
Well, let me correct the sort of, what happened with Woodward and Kern is they came to us and said, as we're negotiating a new agreement with Camden, and they said, look, when you Rockport sewer users are paying the same rate as every Camden sewer user is paying. And that meant that Rockport sewer users are essentially paying double because they're paying for the Rockport collection system, and on top of that, they're paying for the Camden collection system, as well as the Camden sewage treatment costs. So Rockport has some of the highest rates in the state, double what Camden users are paying, because Rockport is paying the full Camden user rate, which is baked in all the Camden collection system costs. So that was the nut of the problem when we began negotiations with Camden over a new interlocal agreement. And Woodward and Kern did an analysis of other utility, shared communities who are sharing sewage treatment facilities. And in those situations, they were allocating costs based on what portion of that community's sewage treatment was being used, what portion of their costs, not the entire collection system. So that was the nut of what Woodward and Kern suggested to us, was how we should handle discussions with Camden. We should start to look at what all the costs are, and Rockport sewer users shouldn't be paying twice, both for their own collection system and the Camden collection system. Now, there was an error in the number, and that did cause some trouble, but we never, and Camden in the original meeting agreed with that approach. They said, that makes sense. We agree with that. We'll calculate numbers and get back to you with our numbers and sort of an allocation of these costs. This was in January of 2020. In March, April of 2020, now we all know what was happening in March of 2020. The pandemic was hitting, everything was shutting down, town governments were everybody was frozen. There were so many things that had to be taken care of. But our Woodward and Kern engineer had come up with some calculations and sent those back to Camden, and initially had said, hey, how is it going? Do you have your own analysis? We're waiting for those numbers so we can move forward. And Camden came back and said, we actually aren't sure we're going to go that route. We think we're going to just make you pay the same Camden user rate. So even though in January they had said this sounds like a good approach, in March/April of 2020, they had shifted and turned back and said, no, we think Rockport should pay the full user rate that every Camden user pays. And Woodward and Kern went back and they made some calculations about what an appropriate user rate might be if we did actually allocate. They looked into the Camden treatment plant and the Camden collection system and allocated costs, sent that information to Audra and said, this is our best attempt because we don't have numbers from you, but we're fully willing to discuss more with you. If you see any errors or problems in what we've done here, please let us know. We want to work with you. We didn't hear anything back, nothing from Camden. Then we continue to hear we want the full sewer user rate that every Camden user is paying, and that just wasn't acceptable. By that summer of 2020, we had a full-on revolt from our sewer users. And we have so many sewer users who are not able to pay their bills in this town because the rates are so high. And so it was a good faith attempt to work with Camden to find the problem, which was this notion that Rockport users are paying for the entire Camden sewer system, not just the portion that we benefit from or use. And we could not get the Camden Select Board or the town manager to really negotiate with us. Now, it was the pandemic. Town revenues had been cut off. The state had said nobody has to pay. There were so many other things going on. But it wasn't until November of 2022, so in 2021, we're faced with a new wastewater budget that we have to do for our users. Again, the numbers just keep going up. Camden's sewer rate has increased a lot over the time, and we could not get a meeting with Camden. We couldn't get them to discuss any of this with us, despite requests. And we finally met with Audra and a group of us, and this is after the lawsuit was filed. So, we finally had to take some action. We wanted to get their attention. We weren't intending to underpay them. We felt like we have to take a stand for our sewer users, and we wanted to get their attention. It never occurred to us that they would just let that go for 6 months and not even talk to us. We assumed that we were neighbors, we were going to be able to work together, and surely there was a mutual interest in working together, and we could not get them to work with us. We couldn't get them to return our calls. We couldn't get them to even respond to these engineering analyses and all of that. So it was very frustrating. Because we did feel like we were neighbors. And our whole intent was to renegotiate and enter into a new interlocal agreement with Camden. And we didn't have a willing partner next door. So we ended up in the lawsuit. We end up in a meeting with Audra, and she's talking about there's an error. Everybody should have seen the error, which she apparently had known from April of 2020 that our Woodard and Kern engineer had made a mathematical error. And that was never pointed out, even though the engineer's email said, this is my best attempt, but please let me know if this is, if I've missed something or if there's an error in this information. So I speak sort of passionately about this because to be accused of not having worked in good faith with Camden is so backwards from what my experience was through this whole period. And once we sat down with Audra and understood this math error, we immediately paid up, corrected the math error, and expressed a willingness to work with them. That meeting went really well, and we all thought, oh, good, we're working together again. This is what we want to see. And then we went forward. Meanwhile, the lawsuit's sort of hanging over. We end up in mediation. The first day we go to mediation, this is an 8-hour mediation day. We have a court-sanctioned mediation. We're in separate Zoom rooms. So we have our town manager, I was there for the town of Rockport. We have Woodard and Kern and our lawyer. I don't think Woodard and Kern was there. It was just the lawyer.
Right.
And the same on Camden side. They had Bill Kelly, their lawyer, a town manager, and their select board chair.
Yep.
So we're in separate Zoom rooms. The mediator comes to us and he says, okay, let's talk about this. Is this a divorce or a long-term agreement? And we said, we want this to be a long-term agreement. We want to work with Camden. And he said, okay, great. He goes to the other Zoom room with the Camden folks, and it's quite a while, actually. 20 minutes later, he comes back to us and he says, it's a divorce. And we said, well, he says, it's a divorce. So let's talk about what the divorce terms are. And that's how we spent the rest of that mediation day. And we went back another month later to finish the mediation, which hadn't been completely fruitful in terms of the divorce terms. And we were thinking we were going to have to go to court. But the next time we got together, again, separate Zoom rooms and a mediator, we came up with terms that were mutually agreeable to both sides. But a key point for Camden was that we get off their system in 6 years. And I know we'll hear the lawyers who, both Paul Gibbons and Bill Kelly saying, I don't know that Bill Kelly would say this, but that wasn't an issue in the lawsuit. The lawsuit had nothing to do with long-term relationships with Camden. But that was a critical point for Camden in order to resolve the lawsuit, was that we agreed to get off in 6 years, which was computed as the time it would take for us to build our own sewage treatment plant. So that's how that played out. And then we came back, and John and Audra ran into each other, we were talking, and they said, and both said, we can do better than this. We can work together. We don't need to immediately sever our relationship, even though that was the outcome of the mediation. So rather than implement the terms of the mediation by each of the select boards, John and Audra, the 2 select board chairs and the 2 vice chairs, came together for a meeting on August 2nd. Very positive meeting, very positive meeting. We were going to start talking about how we could bring together exactly what you described, right? The idea they've got an older plant. We, Rockport, would like to work with them. We have to have an ownership stake in the plant in order to bond money in order to help with that plant. So let's talk about what ownership stakes might look like and how we could work together on this. We were like talking about having a barbecue together at the, somewhere together because everything was so great. So this is August 2nd. Camden then has a September 5th select board meeting. At that meeting, Audra says to the select board, she said, well, we agreed to a 15% discount for Rockport on their wastewater rates, but since they now are going to maybe stay on our system longer term, I think we should take away the 15% discount, which was a reflection of the fact that Camden was spending money on things that did not benefit Rockport. So within a month of this meeting where we're all getting along, we've got a plan to work together, they're already in public in a meeting taking away something that had been bargained for and agreed to among the parties. So and then I've had some coffees and some lunches with Tom Hedstrom, with Sophie Romano, with Allison trying to look for where can we work together? Why can't we solve this wastewater treatment issue? Why do we have to have a divorce? Why can't we work together? And the December 5th meeting, both John and I went with that idea in mind. Let's talk about how we can work together. And what we heard, and Michael referred to that, is we heard some of their select board members saying, we have to figure out our own system before we can talk to Rockport. We don't even understand what's going on in our system. And I think this graph is illustrative of that. There are issues, and I think their select board members have not been as focused on the sewer issues as the Rockport Select Board has, because it hasn't mattered to them. They've got other issues, they have the dam issues, they have other things that have mattered to them. It did matter to Rockport. We were trying hard to work with them in good faith, and we'd get these sort of favorable, I'm still sad about how things worked out after that August 2nd meeting, but there's a point where I haven't reached that point. I'm still more than willing to talk to Camden. But to be accused of it all being Rockport's fault just shows such a lack of understanding of the really serious, committed efforts we've made to try to work with our neighbors.
So I would not say it's all Rockport's problem, but I will say Rockport started the problem. And you may disagree with that.
Fair enough.
I'm looking at it from both sides. I got no axe to grind here. But if I was sitting over there, I'd say they're the ones that caused the problem. They're the ones that didn't pay the bill. So my real suggestion is get it out of the hands of the select board, Rockport Select Board and Camden Select Board. Set up a committee of 6 people, 8 people, 4 from each town, and let them focus on the sewer system. And that could be their one focus. If I was sitting in Camden's seat right now, and I saw that the town of Rockport has had this study committee working on how to build their own new plant, I'd be saying, well, what the hell? They want to build a new plant. Why are we wasting our time talking to them at all?
Well, and at this group's request, we did send that information to them.
That's why I say you should not be putting something like this on the ballot. That's like throwing gas on the flames.
Well, I think...
I totally disagree with the concept of going to the voters. I don't think your voters in Rockport are going to support it. And then what are you going to be doing?
Well, let's get back into sort of some organized fashion. Wait a minute. Taylor, please sit down. Okay?
Yes, ma'am.
We're going to step back a little because we've sort of jumped into this, but we have people from both sides of this issue who are here tonight. And I think what we need to do is sort of, you've heard my sort of background and explanation of the efforts, really serious efforts Rockport has made, and people can disagree on who caused what when. But it was really in looking for the best possible outcome for our sewer users in our town. So right tonight, we have a group of Rockport residents who you've already heard believe that we haven't worked hard enough to find a collaborative solution with Camden, or we haven't had the right people from Rockport working with the right people in Camden. We have other Rockport residents who believe that now we have an economically viable alternative to build a state-of-the-art treatment plant in Rockport that allows for future sewer expansion along Route 90 and workforce housing, and we should pursue that option. And the sooner we begin down that road, the better for sewer user rates, the better availability of federal grants, there are some important federal grant programs that will be expiring over the next year or two. So the longer we wait, the less likely we are to be able to access these grants. And they'll essentially will allow Rockport to control its economic future. Now, as Bill Bowe's presentation indicated, and I think as we've tried to say, none of that prevents us from working with Camden in the meantime. We can be on parallel paths. We can approve the sewer treatment facility, and we can continue discussions with Camden. if anything, that will create some pressure on the group. If Camden truly wants to work with us, that'll create some pressure to come together and reach some agreement. That'll give us our best leverage with Camden if this proposal is on our ballot and is approved by our voters. So what I'd first like to do is start with, and we've already heard from some of you, and maybe there's, I don't know if there are more. Let's start with the Rockport residents who want to speak in favor of delaying the vote on the WRF to allow more time for Rockport and Camden representatives to discuss possible solutions. And just by a show of hands, can you let me know how many of you would want to speak on that topic? Scott? I'm asking for a show of hands of folks who are in favor of delaying putting the wastewater treatment facility on the ballot in favor of negotiating with Rockport, various Rockport and Camden representatives before that's put on. So who would like to speak on that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so we have 5 folks that want to talk about that.
I think there were 6.
Did I miss somebody?
5 or 6.
Thanks.
Okay, well, 5 or 6. And then we have other Rockport residents who are here in support of Rockport building its own treatment plant, want to put the bond question on the plant, for this plant, on the June 2024 ballot, which does not preclude the ability to talk with Camden in the meantime. Who is here to speak in favor of that option? Okay. All right,
Can I get a third option?
what's your option?
Sorry, I don't, this isn't
Sam.
about delaying it for additional pieces. When you look at the economic model pieces that we put up through and across, all of this hinges on the fact that we need more economic development in order to increase the amount of users and get the user rate down. Every one of those models that you look at starts out with a debt service of over $1,200 a year. That equals $100 a month, which is $100 a month to do business or live on either Route 1 or Route 90 if we put that line down that road. I'm curious how we think that's going to drive economic growth in those areas versus chill it. That is the question I had, or I guess my point. It just seems like it's two things where you really need to drive economic growth, but immediately, the moment you put it in, it impinges the people that are there. And it might not bring more people in, but what it does do is hurt the people that are already there. Because if we don't add those extra users, those people are stuck with that number. And maybe that's part of it. Maybe that's part of like how we want to go through with this piece. But right now, it's under $300 a year. This system will change that, and that changes to like all the 47 units that were at the villages that came down and complained about it during our public meetings. That number goes up significantly for them. I mean, it goes up significantly for us too. It's why it makes the economics of this work, because we're getting $50,000 out of that group, what we wouldn't have otherwise. But like,
And I think that's just a basic question of town infrastructure and when you invest and have to make some decisions that are, can appear to some people as risky, but also it's the only way to grow the pie in Rockport to develop our tax base.
I get that piece. I mean, there's debate, and the task force definitely received some pieces around whether or not we could develop as much as would be necessary to pull this off. That's its own part of it. I know we've answered those. We say this is how we're going to kind of make things better for the current Rockport sewer users. But because we're going to put the cost onto people who aren't currently involved. And I guess that is your question of, how we do infrastructure.
And they'll have available to them, the reason that will be put on them is they'll have available to them a public sewer system for when their
absolutely.
septic field fails.
And I want to make sure that those people know that that's the reason why they all get to vote, and not just the people who are currently on the system.
Well, all taxpayers, all voters.
That's correct.
are
All
able to
the
vote on
voters
this.
that live on those two roads that would be subject to that cost. I just want to make sure they understand that.
Okay, thank you. All right, so let's start with the folks who are in favor of delaying the vote on the WRF to allow more time for Camden and Rockport representatives to discuss possible solutions. I do have a question, and I don't know if it would be for Taylor or someone else, but I know we're all talking, there is a petition, this group has put together a petition that will be on the ballot that raises this very question. And I have a question because I don't mean to just feel like poor Rockport, we've worked so hard and we can't get Camden to respond to us, but is there a companion petition in Camden? to require the Camden Select Board to talk to Rockport?
I don't know the answer to that. I live in Rockport.
Okay. Stuart or Philip, are you aware of a companion petition?
I'm not aware of that at all. No.
Okay. So once again, Rockport has to talk to Camden, but Camden doesn't have to talk to Rockport? Okay, so let's start with whoever wants to go first on the side of delaying putting this treatment plant on the ballot to have a discussion with Camden and Rockport representatives.
I still have the mic.
Okay, well, this will be your third time to comment, but go for it, Taylor.
I'm going to say it somewhat differently. So 25 years ago, Camden and Rockport owned the high school, and Hope Appleton and Lincolnville tuitioned kids in. So a bunch of us had the idea that it worked better for a unified system where all 5 towns had owned the system. It took years to develop the plan, and it took a solid year to get the information out to the voters, so they understood what was going on. The cost of that for Rockport voters was a small fraction of what this standalone system is going to cost. I think the idea that Rockport voters are going to understand what they're actually voting for, if that's on the ballot, in 2 months, it's just unlikely that it's going to pass. I may be wrong, but I'd be floored if it passed. That's all I want to say.
Okay, thank you.
Taylor finally gave me a chance. I'm Cheryl Lichty. I live over on Spruce Street, and I'm just a resident of Rockport who's been, following the sewer issue a lot more over the last year and a half. I think a lot has already been said. I just want to emphasize that, having circulated the petition and talked to a lot of people who do want to see a comparison with a third option, I really don't think that anyone believes that all of us who've been engaged in the sewer issue, most importantly, actually, the town officials, the select board, have not been working hard on this. I am, confident, and I think the presence here tonight of so many people assures us that there are many people in this community who are really committed to some kind of affordable future for sewer services that is, involves investment in infrastructure and hopefully also collaboration with our neighboring towns, because I think we keep talking about this town, and that town, but we are really all one community, and I think that's a lot of why those of us who are looking for another comparator are here. I've only lived here for about 20 years, but speaking to the school issue, I think that's a key example of collaboration that's been really valuable, and I don't think anybody wants to walk that back. We do the same thing or something similar in terms of solid waste. We collaborate on law enforcement. It's just very, very hard to imagine that continuing to collaborate doesn't turn out somehow to be the answer. And I think it's worth us looking more at that. I do share the concerns that have been expressed that putting a ballot measure on in June to move us down the path of building our own plant is the wrong signal to Camden. I worry about that a lot. I had one final thought here that's like flying out of my head. But I guess the last thing is maybe more a question for members of the Select Board and John. I think the other thing that a lot of us are thinking about in terms of making some comparison that is not just the comparison to the status quo is that it seems to us that a lot of why sewer rates for Rockport residents rose so precipitously after the interlocal agreement expired was that Rockport had no other mechanism to meaningfully or appropriately contribute to the infrastructure improvements that Camden needed to make, because all we can do is pay user fees, right? Like, we can't bond anything. We can't invest in infrastructure. And I'm not here to say, well, we should cover everybody else's I&I costs. And I hear that repeatedly in this conversation. It seems like a dangerous assumption. It appears that some of the rise in fees in 2020, and please correct me if I'm wrong, had to do with the fact that at that time, Camden also found itself needing to commit to a pretty large infrastructure project involving the plant itself, the plant where our wastewater goes. And there was very reasonable expectation that we should contribute to that, and no other way for us to contribute other than rising fees. So in thinking of like how we got to where we are today, it's really hard to get my head around. I think a lot of people who signed the petition, which was, you know, overwhelmingly easy to gather signatures for, was this idea, why aren't we instead pursuing a mechanism that would allow us to actually invest in infrastructure and collaborate with our neighboring community, which is really just our larger community? I'd love to know what other thoughts are on that. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Sam Temple. I'm a Rockport business owner, the chair of the Harbor Committee, a taxpayer and a sewer payer. I'd like to speak to some of the reasoning that has been, put behind the proposal for our standalone system. The town's article in the Rockport Resource, and again on Bill's 4-page memo that just came in, purports that this system aims at reducing a pollution issue in the harbor, but this proposed system intends no change to the way that sewer water is collected anywhere, including around the village, the Goose River watershed, or the Lily Pond watershed. Secondly, the development of workforce housing has been cited, and I agree with that need as a business owner. However, the suitability of the areas proposed along Route 90 that would be served by this system, and the capacity of our drinking water reservoir, as Bill points out, and the capacity of our school systems probably ought to be more thoroughly considered before we aim towards this kind of growth. I think 300 houses was a number I saw on the screen there, which is significant. This system has been promoted to deepen the tax base, by encouraging growth. Again, I don't think taxes work that way. I think that more developed places have higher taxes because they need more services. And finally, the idea that we can't get along to collaborate with Camden, in my mind, we've heard the opposite from Stu just now and from a letter that Audra Calder sent on the 25th of March. So all this to say that I think putting a measure on the ballot to push for a standalone system would be antagonistic and self-defeating rather than a positive step. So, thank you.
Thanks, Sam. Scott?
Scott Gazar, introduce myself. So a couple of thoughts. One is, as I listen, my observation is that there's too much emotion in this whole debate. And I think what we're proposing is not that we tell the town that we must, as you characterized it, we must work with Camden, but rather that we just need to gather more information so a reasonable decision can be made. I think you mischaracterized what the petition was about. And I would even observe that when you were introducing the two sides, there was a very brief and dismissive description of what this group was proposing, and then a long and detailed and very positive description of the other. My point is, too much emotion from both select boards, and that's why gathering information and getting a separate group from both boards involved would be worthwhile. I don't think we lose anything from delaying for a few months to gather information. The last thing I'll say is I do modeling for a living. I don't model sewage, but that's what I do. And when I look at these models, and they're so superficial, and then from those models you are making assumptions about motivations, it's just the wrong thing to do. It's just the wrong thing to do. It doesn't work that way. And then when, as Sam Clark earlier said, when the first thing you know about modeling is if you can't predict back to the facts we know, as he said, the dates, the rates today, there's probably a bug in the model. So I don't know who's had a chance to look at these models, but I'm very suspicious that they're just leading us in the wrong direction. That's what I want to say.
Thank you. Let me make sure, Marcia, and then after we get the people who already raised their hands to speak on this. Oh. Hi, Sally.
Sally Cook, resident. A phrase that has been around all evening, and especially from Bilbo and Megan and Denise, is without more information. And I keep thinking, you know, what's the rush? 34 years ago, when the Camden Select Board was refusing to work with Rockport, two citizens groups got together, and both select boards listened to them, and the problem was resolved. And that's something that hasn't been tried yet here. And it seems as if going in both directions, a whole lot more information is needed. Megan also kept saying, you know, without more information. So there's time. And I hope this select board would be willing to work with citizens groups and the Camden Select Board as time goes along to get more information for possibly a collaborative solution.
Thank you.
Hello, Philip Conkling again. When I, Camden resident, previous Rockport resident, when I began my professional life trying to facilitate discussions between small communities, island communities, I would start out a presentation between two island communities as islands have a lot in common. And invariably, people would stand up and say, "We have nothing in common with those guys next door. We hate them." And so we
I don't
learned
think you've heard that tonight from
No,
us.
okay, anyway, we don't like those guys. They've done,
you haven't
you
heard
won't
anything
believe
like
what
that.
they did to us. They did this, that, and the other thing. Look, I have never been through a divorce. And, but I know people who have. It's very painful. And I think what the group that I have been helping facilitate a discussion with is simply asking for the alternative. I think the work that Bill Bowe and his group and consultants have done in terms of identifying the capital cost that would be required for a standalone system is a very thorough, professional, you know, it looks really like you've done your homework. But what's the alternative on the table at the same time? Compared to what? And you haven't compared it to staying involved in some basis with Camden. So, you know, that's not really a good way of doing this, in my opinion. You can't beat something with nothing, and you've got to have two alternatives on the table, and that's what I think the group that I've been helping to facilitate is in favor of. So I would, but if you're doing that, you know, in this environment where there are heightened emotions, God knows, on both sides, it's, you know, I do think that the proposal of, you know, saying, well, if we can't agree, we're going to go ahead and put that on the ballot, I just have to say, if I were a Rockport resident, I would think that is extraordinarily risky. You know, not only because I don't know how many people would be voting for a $22 to $38 million bond issue in the absence of an alternative, but if you lose, where's that leave you with respect to negotiating with Camden? I mean, anyway, it doesn't seem to me to enhance your position, which is why it seems good to take a deep breath during a contentious period like this, step back and get other people involved to do the kind of due diligence on the collaboration question that has not been produced. To fail to do that is bad government, in my opinion, on both sides of the border.
So I do have to respond to that just briefly, and I'll keep the emotions low. But I do think it's not that we didn't want the option. We didn't want to be presenting this option on the treatment plant. We wanted to be presenting the option of a renewed interlocal agreement that allowed Rockport to expand its capacity and provide fairer sewer rates to its users. We were not able to have that option and present it. And I think the divorce analogy isn't about how we can't get along. It's that if one party wants a divorce, the other party's getting divorced. You can't force somebody to stay in a marriage who doesn't want to be there. Now, I'm responding to that specific set of circumstances, but we have also been saying tonight that we do agree and are willing to work with Camden. We will have a vote later, but I believe that we can put the WRF on the ballot and still have time to continue discussions with Camden. And if Camden's gotten religion now and really wants to talk to us, we're happy to do that. And maybe it's not us, maybe it's the representatives. So I just want to sort of sum that up.
Can I just respond, since you also responded, Martha White? It seems to me that's like saying to your husband, I'm paying the lawyer, I'm going down this road, but I'm going to keep working with you, and just in case, so we might be able to work this out. That seems a little disingenuous to me, and it doesn't seem to serve the purpose or act in good faith toward a reconciliation is, I think, what we should do. I would also point out that I think you got bad advice, again, when you went into that mediation and allowed the divorce question to come up, because it was not part of the lawsuit. It should not have been part of the mediation, and both towns should have
Well, that was the
refused to have that
court-appointed
happen.
mediator.
I mean, you
Yeah.
simply did not have to answer that question in that lawsuit. It was not on the table, and it should never have been. So I'd just leave it at that.
Okay, thank you. David?
Thank you. I'm David Bannister, and been in town about 20 years, and I appreciate all the remarks, and I appreciate the history that we're just coming to hear about tonight. If you're not totally involved in a lot of these things, then the history doesn't really come out. And so it's nice that you've brought all the history of the relationship. But did you send a letter to them saying you didn't want to work with them anymore, or did they send you?
They sent us.
Saying you're cutting off.
They sent us a letter on March 2022.
So I look at the work that you've done, and I'm aware of it, and I've been to the presentation that was done before, when everyone had a chance to talk about their ideas, and I thought the presentation by Bill Bowe and his whole write-up, which he's been here 3 years and was picked out and willing to put a lot of time and effort into this, and it wasn't just willy-nilly. He's a pretty smart guy, and the rest of his team, and they've done their homework. They were confronted with, as far as he was concerned, were confronted with losing this relationship. Nothing personal, but the letter was written, and so we have to take action on it. So for quite a while now, he and the committee and the board has put in a lot of time on it, but we're hearing that suddenly it's big news to everybody. Some people on this side that we're not cooperating, but the world is evolving. I believe in that, and we're evolving tonight. I can see that, but it's. I think. Yeah, I don't know whether to say we should go to the vote or not. I'm inclined to say yes, based on what I've read and the way they've handled it, It's really very well done. And many people probably haven't had time to read it all through. But they're recommending doing what they feel is the right thing to do at this time. And, but Bill concludes, even though I've done this and I've worked with that, I'm not saying that we should not walk away or not negotiate, but everyone's trying to negotiate here without having written something else, a better program. Why hasn't something happened from the Camden side? Anyway, I won't go on, but anyway, thank you.
Thank you, David. Joan?
Before Joan speaks, and I know that she's an expert at speaking into the microphone, this is a very, I want to be technical here so your passions can get out. This is a very directional microphone. I disappear. I'm not here. Nobody at home can hear me. Oh, I'm back. Okay, so if you could take your passion, put it into one arm, and then lock the other arm right here, that'd be great.
Thank you, Jeff. You know, I have been thinking about this for some time now, and I've been trying to stay very, very neutral, and I think I still am in a way. I don't think these two proposals are mutually exclusive. I think we can be doing both. I honestly do. I think we can go ahead with the vote because there are some advantages to financing right now, but also, as I understand it, we won't be spending big money until several years hence from now. I don't know how many years, but
Yes.
and I also think we absolutely, in good faith, need to sit down with Camden, and I like the idea of some a citizen group with knowledge, not just anyone, not anyone who's, I mean, not just an interest. Like, in some ways, I'd love to sit down in something like that, but no way. I think we need people who have some experience and some knowledge, fundamental knowledge of what these complex systems need and what they will need in the future. So I just think we can do both, and I don't think that holding the vote excludes good, honest work with Camden. The other thing that listening to your wonderful work that you've and the task force has done, I really think it would help if we could get, and I know we haven't been able to, we've tried, but if we could get the numbers from Camden so that in the best case scenario, what would it cost the taxpayers in Rockport if we came together? I think that would be extremely important to be able to compare. We've got the numbers that we think would be more likely with the vote and if the current plan moved forward. But we really can't make good decisions in the long run until we know what the cost would be if we stayed with Camden and we could make a comparison, and an honest comparison. I mean, an honest cost, knowing what we now know, and we'll learn more about the condition of the treatment plant in Camden that we would be joining. So thank you.
Great. Thanks, John. Yes.
My name's Aaron Johnson, a citizen. I want to ask the select board if they're committed, they believe that the sewage treatment plant is the thing to do right now.
Well, we'll be voting on that in a minute, so we're listening to public comment.
I'd also like to ask if you agree that a citizen group would be a good idea.
I don't have any objection to that.
So that implies that you're not
But I
totally
agree with Joan,
committed
it
in
needs to be people with knowledge on, very technical issues. And we need to know that there's a comparable group in Camden, and that the Camden Select Board is willing to sort of, we see a petition that's sort of imposing a certain framework on Rockport. I really would like to see a similar framework imposed on Camden, because it makes it, we've been at this sort of, we keep trying to negotiate and Camden doesn't respond. We keep trying to negotiate and Camden doesn't respond. And this just puts us in that same situation. So if there's a countervailing action in Camden, that would make me feel a
Well,
lot better about moving forward along those lines.
From what I hear, there's still a lot of communication, a lot of people saying that Camden is willing to work. So let's take that to an end and see if we can accomplish that.
Yeah.
And so if that's still something we're trying to do, why would we put this on the ballot now?
Because I think it's important for our sewer users and our economic development, but we're going to talk more about that in a
Because
minute.
you're
We're still receiving public comment. So right now, if you have a public comment to make, we'd love to hear it. Otherwise, we have other people who are here to speak.
Because you're
that we
committed to
can-
the sewage treatment center, is that why?
Do you have any comments to make?
That's a legitimate comment and a
That's not a
legitimate
comment,
question.
that's a question.
For a citizen to the select board member.
You're welcome to send me an email or give me a call if we could move on to the next person who has a comment.
Hi, I'm Betsy Elwin. I'll try not to repeat a lot of what we've heard, but I sort of think of this in three. There's time, there's money, and there's flexibility. And I don't think time is on our side in this case because we do not have an agreement. Our agreement expired. And we are basically at the mercy of whatever Camden says we have to pay. As a sewer user, I mean, those of us who are sewer users, I guess everybody here probably, because we're the ones interested in this, we're going to pay whatever Camden tells us to pay because we have no choice. And that's why I agree with Joan. I think we can move forward on both fronts. And I don't think that weakens our position with Camden at all. In fact, just the opposite. I think it strengthens our position because Camden will see that our select board is trying to move us towards a solution. We have no solution at this point. Camden is cutting us off, and they're telling us in many ways that they, one way to help with their problem is by not having Rockport's wastewater come to them. So, I mean, I think we have to start moving in a direction of a solution, and I think that the proposal by the select board that's been informed by this committee that has done so much work that most of us in this room can only understand a fraction of what they've done, even though they've explained it in layman's terms. But I think the time is not on our side, and we've got to move forward with a solution. At the same time, we can be talking to Camden, and they will see that we're serious about getting a solution, and if we can find a solution with them, we're happy to do that. But I don't think that we can wait any longer to start moving towards a solution, because it's only going to cost us more in the future. And it's going to cost us more in the interim, because right now what we are paying for in our sewer bills is our usage, and we're helping to fix Camden's problems that have nothing to do with our distribution system. And that's going to continue until we do something, either jointly or on our own, to build a new plan. So I just don't see why waiting is going to cost us less. And I also think that there is a giant fundamental question about whether it's going to be cheaper for Rockport sewer users to go it alone or to do some kind of a joint plan. And I think that is an open question. And I think a lot of times people assume that, well, building one plant is definitely going to cost less than, building our own plant. I'm not sure that's true. And I don't think anybody in this room can say that. Because when I look at this graph with this big gray area a lot of the water that's going into the sewer treatment system has no business being there. And until that's taken out, I don't understand why we think that it's going to be a net benefit to us to hold hands with Camden and fix all of their problems when it might be cheaper for us to go it alone. I don't know that, but none of us knows that. And I don't think we have the luxury of time to, get the complete answer to that question before we solve this problem. So I think the idea of starting out on our own towards a well-informed proposal, at the same time we're talking to Camden and maybe somebody coming up with a joint proposal that has some real numbers and some real flow information, I think that we can do both at the same time, but we cannot wait. And finally is the flexibility piece. I really think it's a big mistake to tie the hands of our select board and say, the only thing you can do is talk to Camden, when Denise has laid out the history of the select board's efforts to talk to Camden, and there's not any kind of obligation being put on the Camden select board to talk to us. That makes no sense to me. Why would we put a hamstring our select board when their select board is free to say one thing at one meeting and say something else at the next meeting. So I think that to give our select board some credit, that they've been trying, and for whatever reason, they're not getting the kind of cooperation that they would hope for. But to now say, well, you have to do nothing but bang your head against the wall. You can't proceed down the independent path while you're collaborating and trying to come up with a joint solution. That makes no sense to me. So I would encourage us to put the proposal on the ballot and at the same time try to see if we can collaborate.
Thanks, Betsy. Tim?
Thanks. Bill McClellan, Summer Street. And I go back to the, having a fire alarm in my house when the sewer bill came through several years ago. So I've been following this since pretty much the beginning. So there is a lot of material there that's been provided, and it is worth spending some time reading it all. It really is. It's well done. I'm in favor of having this vote go forward. The status quo is really unacceptable in terms of paying. I pay about $300 a quarter, where my friends in Camden are paying $100. And that's just not fair, frankly, to be subsidizing Camden sewer payers. It's just not fair. I believe, too, what Betsy said, delay will just cost us more. The longer we delay, the longer we get into this. We've seen this in Rockport before. We delay, we get into all these other things. Next thing you know, we're 7 years down the road, and we have a half-baked system and not really a system that would really be good for us. I think Camden's system, from what I've read, is going to need improvements, and a lot of them. And I've talked to residents there, and they're not so much in favor of expanding their site there. And they're also going to have a big awakening when Camden's funding comes out of their system. They're going to have to pay a heck of a lot more than $100 a month. It's going to be a whole big awakening for them. So I would hope that by putting this on the ballot, it would put a little fire under Camden and say, let's work with Rockport, and let's make this a joint system. I think that would be a good thing to do. But I'm not in favor of slowing it down. Thanks.
Thanks, Bill. Deborah's right. Deborah?
I'm going to come up here. Thanks. I have some copies of my remarks. So I'm Deborah Hall, and I was elected and served on the Select Board from June 2018 to June 2021. And I was chair for 2 years from 2019 to 2021. And I'm not passionate about this subject, I will tell you, because I'm not sitting there anymore. And one of the reasons why I'm not. I opted not to run for a re-election, but I continue to work with the town on certain matters of interest to me, including broadband and economic development. I currently chair the Economic Development Committee for the town. I should also mention that I've been a sewer user. Bob and I have been sewer users for over 25 years. Also a trained mediator in my professional career. I will say at the outset, so you know where I'm coming from, that I agree with a lot of what Joan and Betsy had pointed out. I appreciate all of the history and everything that, the views that you guys have all shared. I think it's been a very useful discussion. I'd like to give you a little bit of recent history as of a few years ago. We've been at this for 6 years, at least 6 years. And I can say that with my own experience. 5 years ago, we were really intent on trying to come up with a renewed agreement with Camden. And, Camden just wasn't interested in talking to us. It's a fact. It's a fact. I'm not trying to be critical of Camden. It's a fact. And so prior to my leaving the select board asked me for my last task in May of 2021 to sit down with the then chair of the Camden Select Board, Bob Falciani. And the reason they asked me to do that was because I was always a huge supporter of trying to cooperate, do things together with Camden. And I think we successfully did that in a lot of ways. From the time that I was elected, even before I was chair, to the time I left, every month we would have meetings between the two chairs and the vice chairs, and sometimes the town managers. It started off with the town managers, and later the town managers were busy. I think they didn't want to talk to us anymore. But the point is that we had very productive meetings. We had kind of an early warning system of things that were brewing. I have been supportive of, when you talk about sharing high school, sharing police departments, fire departments, I've been supportive of sharing things with Camden all along. And so anyway, when it came, you guys will all recall we had the school litigation, and unfortunately we had to sue the school district, and including Camden. But per my direction from the select board, as I was walking from my house after the meeting, from the meeting down at the Opera House down to my house, I called up Bob and I said, sorry, but we're going to have to file this lawsuit. No offense, but this is just what, I'm a lawyer also, and so this is what we have to do, for legal reasons. And so Bob got it, we were fine, but we were friendly litigants. Eventually, we mediated that settlement, and the mediator really attributed the ability to mediate that between to Bob and my relationship and the vice chairs, because we had developed such a good working relationship together. So, enter in this sewer situation. We were not able to get any kind of information from Camden. They were not participating with us. They were not engaging in discussion with us. So the select board said, Deborah, go out and talk to, meet with Bob, bring Woodward and Kern with you, sit down, and try to hammer something out. And that's what we did, mostly a day-long meeting. And by the time we were done with that, we were both in agreement that the best way to go was a regional utility. We planned out the steps that would be necessary for that regional utility. We also knew at the time that Camden's system was in worse shape than Rockport's. Rockport had really invested money and kept their system pretty new, up to date, and Camden had not. Camden knew that they had a lot of I&I problems, which Bob, freely admitted to me during that time. So we agreed that we would go back to our select boards and we would push for that regional utility. Then what happened was that I went off the select board, and what happened after that was in June 2021. And in September 2021, all of a sudden, I think Camden realized, I don't think they knew they had the I&I problems that they have. We certainly didn't know that they have the level of I&I problems that they have. And so I think that at the end of the day, Bill is very right about where Camden is coming from in terms of they really have problems on their hands. And that became apparent when the Maine DEP entered into a consent agreement with Camden in September 2021, just a few months after Bob and I had had our long discussions in May. And so I do want to say, Stuart, that I was not part of the select board that stopped paying Camden. Okay, that was right after I left. And I'm sorry, but I have been very critical of that move, of that select board doing that. But that's neither here nor there. I think the bottom line today is that Camden has issues with their system, and they have bigger problems than Rockport. And so I think we have to realize that, and we have to protect Rockport. We have to look at this from an economic development standpoint, And putting on my economic development hat, you know, there were residents who appeared before the select board back in 2019, when I was still on it, that they said that they were being forced to sell their homes that had been in the family for generations because they couldn't afford the taxes. They had to rent, do short-term rental. They had to rent their homes in order to make ends meet. And we took those comments to heart. At a select board workshop that took place here in this room last fall, Marie Libby from the school district was here. Also, some leaders from the Penn Bay, and they talked about what dire straits they're in with respect to not being able to have sufficient workforce. You know, we've probably all experienced the lack of medical care or capability or availability now compared to what it was years ago. It's not going to get any better. Teachers can't be hired in the school because they don't have the workforce housing that they need. And it was very compelling testimony, and if you haven't heard it, I would encourage you to look at that online. There's two ways that we can address the tax issue. You know, when the select board only has control over about a quarter of the budget, because the other 3/4 of it is determined by the school district and then the county. Either you decrease expenditures or you increase revenue. It's just that simple, right? And this select board does not have that much control over that much of the budget at only a quarter of it. And so they can't decrease expenses. They have to increase revenue, or we are going to get worse and worse in terms of our tax situation by not having a sufficient tax base. We need to have workforce housing. We need to have economic growth. Sorry, I wish I had a bottle of water. We need to have economic growth. And it has to start with workforce housing, which has to start with sewer going out Route 90. And we can't just, sit around and wait for Camden to decide that, you know, that they're willing to talk to us, or that they're ready to talk to us. Because again, even if they want to talk to us, they've got their own problems that don't include us. And that's just not going to go away. It's not going to go away anytime soon. And our economic development really can't wait any longer. Taxes are going to continue to go up. Workforce housing is going to continue to have us not being able to have sufficient services available here, whether it's medical or restaurants or whatever. And so I think that, you know, the Economic Development Committee is definitely in the place where we need to expand the tax base now, and sewer is key to that. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you. Richard? Or Marcia? Go ahead, Marcia.
Thanks. I'm Richard Remsen. I live in West Rockport. I grew up in Camden and moved to West Rockport. I've been there about 50 years. I'm an artist, do a number of different things. And I wanted to compliment you, Denise, on giving a comprehensive history, which you also gave to the voluntary committee, which I've spent time listening to, which has been incredibly informative. And also to thank you for an excellent job. And it's not difficult to see on Bill's chart that Camden has had delayed maintenance on their pipes for decades. And to say they didn't know, I think, you know, they've been hiding it, or for some reason, nobody's been telling them. In one of the discussions at the voluntary meeting, I had suggested, wow, what if Rockport throws $2 or $3 million to Camden and say, fix your infiltration issue, that would certainly be a lot cheaper than building a new plant. I am in complete favor of putting a new sewer plant on the ballot. Something that's modern, up to date, I think is a better solution and a better idea. But I also agree with Taylor and my friends across the aisle that continued conversations with Camden is absolutely necessary. I think we should take them down to the waterfront and pay for their drinks and discuss things seriously. I've been on a lot of different committees, and I have an interest in land use. What's that? Good deal. I've had a real interest in land use planning and watched Rockport change over time. And it's easy to see that West Rockport is becoming much more of a significant location. I don't agree with the sign that's there at the intersection that says, "Welcome to Rockport." I think that's an insult to those people who live in West Rockport.
Good point.
But my neighbor, Tom Douglas, who some of you might know, referred to West Rockport as the town they tore down. But I think we're at a real crossroads when it comes to establishing, what's the strategy? If Camden's not coming to the table and Rockport's making every good faith effort, how do you create a better strategy and pull them in? And I think having that sewer initiative on the ballot is exactly right. I think it gives Rockport a better negotiating position to talk to Camden. And I still think that with the repairs that Camden has in mind, changing a few pumps and doing a few things doesn't solve the real issue, which is, they tried it on Pearl Street last summer, and they made a mess of the place for, jeepers, 3/4 of a year. But that's the key thing, is all this infiltration, and how do you deal with that? And how can Rockport participate in helping Camden as a neighbor would with that infiltration? Certainly a few $1 million is cheaper than $33 million. So there may be some economic benefit if there's a way of creating some grants or something that would help do that. But in the meantime, I think putting the sewer initiative on the ballot is absolutely the right thing to do. Growth in Rockport can't be controlled by Camden denying the expansions that they want to do in the growth areas that are part of Rockport's comprehensive plan. I'm all for it.
Great. Thanks, Richard. Marcia?
So I've lived here for 50 years and I've never been divorced, so I start at ground zero here. And the only thing I wanted to point out is that these people followed the law. They created a petition. They got the number of signatures that were required. And I don't see how we can tell them they can't have what they followed the legal process to do.
It'll be on the ballot.
Okay. Both will be on the ballot then?
Yes.
Okay, great. Who gets this?
Yes is always a good answer. Okay, do we have any other?
I'm going to give that back to you.
Nope. Are we done? We have comments for everyone? Okay, great. Oh.
I'm Burke Munger. I've lived here for 5 years. Yeah, it's, got a lot of history here. I'm also Denise's husband. I probably should keep my mouth shut. But, I listen, and we talk, and it occurs to me that there's a lot of passion about, on both sides, about talking with Camden. And someone here suggested that there's a lot of, that there may be goodwill that is not apparent in the government structure, but there is on, in some backroom discussions. So the longtime residents who are passionate about creating a discussion, if they could bring some of the Camden people who are really interested in furthering discussion out to say so, then we'd be getting somewhere. So far, I can understand the passion to work with Camden. There's always, there's so many choices for, so many levels at which we should be cooperating or joining with Camden on various departments. The ambulance services is one that's front and center. But if there passion to speak to create dialogue with Camden can only work if, you know, if, let's see, if we're passionate about speaking with Camden, it would be a real service to everyone here to bring some voice, any voice from Camden saying, yeah, let's talk. Because I just haven't heard anything about Camden coming to talk. Now, whether it's through the select board or through the looking for information or so wishes are wonderful. We should be passionate about creating a partnership here, but there has to be some dialogue. We have not seen dialogue. If it happens in the back rooms, let's hear something about that, because as far as I can tell, it's not there. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Burke. We done? Well, thank you to everyone for coming tonight and speaking. It's a pleasure, really, to see so many people engaged in these issues that are critical to our town's future. While we might not all agree on any specific issue, I think we can all agree that we are always looking for the option that's in the best interest of our town and its residents. Now we can, I think that concludes the discussion item portion of the agenda, and we can move on to the action items. And the first action item is approval of the town meeting warrant. John, do you want to introduce that item?
Yeah, so this is the draft meeting warrant, town meeting warrant. There is, so the draft that went out in the initial was the earlier draft before what we had taken out for that, the warrant article, which was number 11. So there are not 16, there are 15 articles. So if you have one that says 16, throw it away. But there are 15 articles, and obviously they include all of the items that were on that initial memo that the board approved at their meeting in March, which, just to run through what's proposed here, Article 3, as it's set up, would be the issue of the WRF. Articles 4 are amendments to the zoning map. Then you have Article 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11, which are all amendments to the ordinance, the land use ordinance. Orion's here to answer any questions. We want to go through that. Article 12 is the expenditures from the municipal budget. Article 13 are the revenues, the anticipated revenues in the municipal budget.
John, how do we get a copy of the latest version?
This
Is it in
copy,
the mail?
well, I printed out some extra paper copies
Oh,
if
okay,
needed,
great.
but Article 14 is the issue of the application for the Roads Business Circle, Rolling Meadow East, and Rolling Meadow West. It should not say part of Hawthorne Drive, so that should be struck. But those articles are part of the application you received from the budget, it was part of the Budget Committee discussion a week ago. And then Article 15 is the citizens petition that was received and approved in terms of enough signatures were submitted to qualify to be on the ballot. And so that's a 15 article warrant. So obviously this is the time when there are edits that could go into these articles. So if there's changes or edits that can go in, and then once you go through that, there's a handful that the board will have to place actually recommendation votes on, which they recommend or not. So.
And how do we proceed on this? Do we do it article by article? Do we call out ones we're going to focus on?
That's probably the easiest way. Just
I
to
know
go
in the
through.
past we had to read everything, but I think we don't have to do that.
I don't
good.
know why that was.
That was
certainly part of the public hearing. When it's part of the public hearing, you would need to read the article for those that are questioned, but.
Okay.
Yeah. No.
Okay. So the first two articles, I think, are just the standard moderator and the various elections that are in place. Article 3 is the one we've been talking about on the WRF. And I guess that one is probably worth discussing. So we've heard a lot of public comment here. We've a lot of opinions on this issue, and we'll be the first to acknowledge this is an expensive project. And that's why the federal government typically makes significant grant monies available for these sewer projects. There's a recognition that the human health and the environment benefit from sewer projects. There has been information provided about failing septic systems and the impact on our harbor of that. And the more we provide our citizens and with options aside from septic systems, a public sewer. As the economic models show, our sewer rates will decline over time because of this project. Rockport currently has some of the highest sewer user rates in Maine, and that's partly because of the expense in sending its wastewater to Camden. Whereas I indicated earlier, our users pay not just for treatment, but also for Camden's sewer collection system. And they pay twice, once for Rockport's collection system and once for Camden's collection system. One of the unique aspects of the sewer world in Rockport is that only the sewer users and those who have property along the sewer line will pay for any of the costs associated with the WRF bond. No other Rockport taxpayers will pay for that project. And even with that limited group of payers, the financial analysis shows that the sewer users will pay lower rates for the sewer over time than they're currently paying by using the Camden and Rockland treatment plants. And it's interesting, we've only looked at graphs that go out 10 years. But the numbers, when you go out even further to the life of the project, continue to bring down sewer user rates. So again, it's a way, as we've heard, where we can have some control over what our sewer rates are. While we've heard from some folks who'd like us to delay the project and not put it on the ballot to allow the Camden and Rockport representatives to explore whether there's a mutually beneficial solution between the towns, it's clear we can approve this warrant article and still allow time for discussions between the towns. Nothing about putting the measure on the June 2024 ballot, which will allow our best opportunities for federal grants, given the expiration of some key grant programs over the next years, would preclude us from talking further with Camden. If they've changed their position on the desire to work with Rockport on long-term sewage treatment, including a fair user rate and increased capacity allowance. In fact, having voter approval of the WRF, as we've heard from some of our commenters, and I agree, would heighten the importance for both towns to work efficiently and quickly to look for these solutions. The October 31 deadline that we saw referenced in the memo would allow time for discussion, but would allow us also to keep the WRF project on track if we're unable to reach agreement with Camden. As Deborah Hall indicated, the town and the select board have been working on this for some time. We've had a number of meetings with various Camden representatives, select board members, between the town managers, chairs, vice chairs, and town managers. And as I sort of already iterated, lots of work has been going on with this since 2019. So contrary to some suggestions, this isn't a sudden decision or one that we're taking lightly or quickly. In fact, some may argue we've taken too long to get to this point. However, we've taken our time, carefully examining what is in the best interest of Rockport taxpayers and sewer users. While Camden has formally notified Rockport that it wants us off their system by March 2026, and in court mediation that it wanted a divorce from Rockport, despite our request for a long-term relationship, we remain open to working with Camden. I'm in favor of putting the Wharf project on the ballot, and I believe the Wharf project will allow Rockport to control its own economic future, creating certainty and control over sewer rates, allowing expansion along Route 90, one of our best locations for future workforce housing. Increased housing and business will allow Rockport to expand its tax base, allowing us to control the mill rate over time. And the economic models show this project is the best opportunity to reduce rates over the long term for our sewer users. It will also result in cleaner water being discharged to Penobscot Bay from a new state-of-the-art treatment plant. As stated above, I don't believe that putting this item on the ballot is inconsistent with a willingness to work with Camden if the guiding principles are met for Rockport sewer users and a binding agreement is reached. So that's sort of where I am. I'm in favor of putting it on the ballot from what I've heard from the public here and as well as my experience working on this issue. Do any of you want to make a...
Well, I've said to a few other people in the past, I do have a very serious concern about the timing because of the June ballot. It seems there's a lot to accomplish between now and June to get the public's fully educated on this. I'm also concerned because we're also going to have the EMS thing on here. So those are my sincere concerns. I had a question, though. Well, one thing, if I remember it, if we were to do our own facility, it's the new state-of-the-art technology. So whatever water is being put out from our facility into the bay is clean, which Camden has acknowledged, and I think everybody knows their technology certainly is not up to that standard.
That's correct. We'll be discharging
Yeah.
cleaner water from our own treatment plant than if our water were being discharged through the Camden
And that's something I thought was very important, just the background. But there's one other question I have, and I don't know if this is throwing a curveball, but I have heard that having our own treatment facility could be sized properly to possibly bring Rockland waste into us to help them, if that were to be decided. Does anybody know if that's?
I think that's true, that our treatment plant as designed has extra capacity, and if there's, and Bill, if you want to respond.
And I don't mean to imply that we're planning on doing that, but is it a potential possibility?
It is. The design element that has to go into that, just design capacity sorts of thing, there's more than enough time, 2 years before that gets settled. And there have been discussions about whether or not we could incorporate with Rockland and potentially even with Camden because of their I&I pressures. Could we do something like, put a branch line up to the landfill, which contributes their own 75,000 gallons a day to Camden, put a branch line up to there and reverse that flow down to Rockport. And I'm not talking about the economics, I'm just talking about the physical nature of it. Where you could, take relief pressure from Camden's system to the tune of essentially a duplicative Rockport flow. In other words, another 75,000 gallons a day. And that's a forever thing for them as well in that landfill. They say us, not just them.
Yeah, I've heard them mention the landfill concern in reviewing those meetings. I didn't quite grasp that part, what it was all about, but I think knowing that we could potentially be helping our neighbors on both sides of us is something to think about also. Those are my thoughts.
Like Joan, I don't think the two items are mutually exclusive either. I think we need to look at moving forward, but I also agree if there's a citizen group that can talk between the two towns and come up with something, I'm willing to go with that as well. So I don't think one precludes the other.
I'll chime in on that. I agree that. Yeah.
So here's my list of questions, which are probably not really a list. Okay, if this is passed, when do we have to start paying any interest on this again? Does it immediately go, or does it wait until we actually do it? I know there's a method to that.
So if the project went forward, how projects like this typically work is you would take a bond anticipation note out during the construction period. You would pay interest on that bond anticipation note, depending on your incremental drawdowns for the project. So you'd only pay on the money that you've drawn down. And then at the end of the construction period, you pay off the bond anticipation note and do your permanent financing for the 30 years.
All right, so.
So not immediately.
So if
Right.
3 passes and 15 passes, which I'm not opposed to that happening, then we'd have a year approximately where we wouldn't be paying any interest, or would it be very minimal because we're doing plans and drawings and
Right, we'd
things
probably
like
have
that?
even longer than that. I think it's an 18-month construction document timeframe, and then a probably 18 to 24-month construction period. So, I mean, we're looking at 4 years, 3 to 4 years before we're paying any interest.
All
or
right, so it
anything like
doesn't,
that.
I mean, we can do 15 and say, we're gonna keep, we're trying to accommodate Camden, and if something comes out of a citizen group and Camden actually listens, then we wouldn't be on the hook for any major expenses then.
We wouldn't, the only expense that we would incur should the board decide to move forward with the project, if the article passes, would be for the cost of getting the construction document.
Right, yeah, all right, that's all, I just wanted to clear that up so that everyone's aware that even if 3 passes and 15 passes, and we continue to do what 15 is asking, then it just puts us in a position where we can say, yeah, this can move forward at some point, while 15 does their project, without having to go through all this all over again in another year.
Yeah,
That's right.
Okay,
okay.
then I'm clear.
Are there any other warrant articles that anybody wants to discuss?
I know, took out 11, which was good.
Yep.
Didn't want that.
Nope.
So now we have a new 11.
And we have some,
11, right.
you know, I think just by way of summary, there's some good land use ordinances in here about affordable housing and increasing the potential for denser housing, which is all sort of consistent with the kinds of economic development discussions that Deborah was mentioning, and that all of us would like to see to increase workforce housing and just housing in Rockport. Notably, there's nothing about short-term rentals in here, and I think we have one item that I want to raise, it's Article 14, and it's the town accepting the dedication of the roads. And I'm not raising it to necessarily say I don't think it should be on the warrant article, but I'm raising it to sort of just briefly observe as a matter of policy. We spent a lot of time in the budget committee meetings talking about the incredible cost to the town of keeping our roads paved. And every time we accept new roads into Rockport, at this point, it's a private road in a subdivision. And there's a past history and cases of accepting these roads. And sometimes the road that's there, that the developer has provided, isn't in the best condition, and the town ends up having to rebuild this road, as well as continue to plow it and then keeping it ongoing for paving. So I think it's just, this is about 1,600 feet is what it says in here, private right-of-way. I know Mike, during the budget discussion, said it'd be about $2,200 a year to plow it.
Right.
We never got to the issue of what it would cost to pave it, because I think it's fair to say you would essentially be thinking of it as a depreciation.
Right. I think roughly it would be around 25,000, I think is what that would be. I don't remember what you ended up paying.
Well, I just paid $70,000 to do a final coat of pavement, finish it.
How much? 70, okay.
For how many feet or how,
So
1,600 feet?
you shimmed it, that was the shimming, okay. So over 10 years, 10 to 12 years.
Yeah, so 70,000. And I think that's the sort of dilemma you have, because when you look at what, and I don't know what the total tax revenue, this is a subdivision that's got 8 housing sites on it, only 4 are built. I think I've got.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yep, 4 of 8, yep.
4 of 8. So that's the minimum. They have to be 50% built out before they can bring these roads into us.
I would say for the town, that would be a smaller number with the amount of pavement we put down.
You can get a better rate than,
A much.
but probably closer to 70 than 25?
It would probably be in the middle somewhere.
Yeah, yeah.
For
But
that
it'd be,
number.
I think one of these lots is for sale or being sold, isn't it?
Oh.
Maybe.
Or did I remember?
That address seems familiar to me.
Or
I
they're
think all the lots are
they're all
sold. They're
right?
all sold,
They're all
but
sold.
4 are built on and 4 aren't.
Oh, I got you, okay. Seems like that one was something that was gonna happen.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I did pull up the tax revenue from the 8 lots.
okay.
So just shy of $24,000 in tax revenues for this past year. And the total taxable value of 1.88 million. So that's what we're getting at, and that's 4 lots built on, 4 still left to be built upon.
Right. And I think as we accept the road, if we move forward with the acceptance of the road through, I guess we don't have a separate time where we get to consider this question. It just comes at us as a warrant article. And I'll note that the Budget Committee voted unanimously in favor of including this road into the town. But I think it's just, again, I'm raising it not to make everybody have to stay here really long, but there's sort of increasing discussions nationwide about this notion that towns, are effectively bankrupt themselves by having so many miles of road that you really never can pay for. I mean, every year we're told with our budget, well, this is $1.2 million this year for road paving, and you're only doing half of what you really should be doing. And it just sucks it out of us. So I don't want to take this particular 1,600 feet and turn this into a big issue, but I do think maybe we should consider it. I know we have an ordinance about this, but consider sort of looking into this a little more carefully and about how these decisions are made, and help educate ourselves.
I would say what you're saying about pavement and maintenance is true. This particular one is a pretty simple one to plow, and there's not a lot of maintenance there at this point, and I don't foresee a lot.
And you know how the road is built and have checked it out, and it is a good
Yes.
road that's going to last for at least 10 years?
It was built by a very reputable, and they done a good job, and the drainage is in good
But
shape.
you're right, some roads wouldn't be up to this quality standard.
Yeah.
And those
And
take
not
very
that this
serious.
particular one, but we do get a lot of calls when people are looking in Rockport to move, to buy, to build. One of the first things we get for a call at Public Works is this road taken care of by the town? So that is a big influence when people are buying or moving here, whether it's this one, another one, wherever. That is something we hear a lot when people are looking.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the tax revenue at $24,000 a year, and if it's a $50,000 a year, I mean, $50,000 in 10 years to repave it, but the public works budget is only a portion of the total town services that every taxpayer should be paying for. You just start to ask questions. I think the reason the Budget Committee, when I was voted in favor of it, was wanting to encourage housing. So, and we just have been discussing the WRF in the context of wanting to encourage housing. So tonight, probably, in my view, wouldn't be the night to take a stand on not accepting public roads, but I'd like to sort of start talking about that a little bit more if we're ever in the happy circumstance of having a lot of developers wanting to come in and build in Rockport.
Yeah.
So why don't you have a road acceptance ordinance and list all the criteria that we have to follow?
I agree.
That point.
That was done before my time, but I agree with you that,
I paid for the deed prep and all these costs to get to this point.
and then have somebody all of a sudden out of left field say, I read this book and it said this wasn't a good idea. Yeah, no, I'm not saying, that's why I'm not.
We wouldn't have paved that final coat this year. So come before the board, so.
Yeah, no, I feel like as a fiduciary of the taxpayers of Rockport, that that's a discussion we should have, and it's the first time that we've had this road acceptance, and it sort of came up in a funny way to me, because other case, almost everything else comes to us first to vote on as a matter, not as part of the town warrant. So I wanted to just raise those concerns. And with that said, I think it should be done more in the context of the ordinance and what is our policy so that developers know what to expect and don't get blindsided. So,
Why is it on the warrant as opposed to a regular meeting item?
So the voters have to accept the road.
Gotcha, okay.
It's like selling a piece of property, buying a piece of property. The inhabitants of the town need to say, we want it, or we don't.
Okay.
All right, anything else on the annual town meeting warrant? Okay, I think we need a motion.
Individually, don't we?
Properly written.
Do we,
Because each one's a for or against or.
okay,
Not all of them would have a recommendation vote.
No, I know that.
Yeah.
But the ones that do, I think we need to make a motion.
yeah, help us
to
walk through this, John, so we get it
accept
done
or-
right, because I just see the one.
Yeah, so.
There's like 3, I think.
I think probably the easiest thing, I think the easiest thing would be to have motion on, to have the board consider a motion for the whole document, or even a section
is-
at a time.
The suggested motion is
Yeah.
I move the board, unless I haven't, you've changed it from the packet.
No, that's,
I move the board approve the 2024 annual town meeting warrant for June 11, 2024 as presented.
or amended, if you
Right,
wanted to
but we
amend
haven't
it.
amended anything.
Well, we did,
Right.
because we took out the part of Hawthorne Drive, didn't we?
Right,
Oh,
yeah.
So
okay.
it's
Oh,
technically
that'll,
amended.
that
Okay.
little
Yep,
phrase
that's
will be
right.
out, that's right.
Good catch.
Okay.
We took out that?
Correct.
Okay,
So that's
so
off.
do
Correct.
That's incorrect.
you want to make the motion?
Do you want to just do it as one?
Yeah, I do, unless others want to do it differently. I didn't,
You gonna do it?
I'm good with all.
Okay. I move the board approve the 2024 annual town meeting warrant for June 11, 2024 as amended.
Second?
okay, Michael. Any discussion? All those in favor? Okay. Great.
And then do you want to go back to the start and work through the recommendations on each item? Or,
That's what I'm not understanding. So
basically the text aside
all the
from that one
places where it
draft.
has a place for the select board recommendation?
Exactly. So the first recommendation vote would be on Article 3.
3.
Okay. And how do we,
Does that have to be
do
a
we have
motion
any
this time?
text for what to say about that, or how do you?
Well, in the past, we've simply had those for and those against, or those abstaining.
Okay, so
just
Article
take the
3.
Raw number.
Those for? Those against? Okay, so that's a 4-0. And you're gonna note that? 'Cause I
4
don't
for,
have-
0 against, 0 abstain.
Okay.
On Article 3, okay.
Correct.
Next article is Article 12, which is the expenditure article.
Okay. And that's show the town at, oh, I got the old one.
So, this
Yeah,
is to
the
see if
one
the
with-
town will vote to raise and appropriate the following expenditures for the 24-25 fiscal year.
Okay,
So that's just all of those articles, all
our-
of
all of our
basically the
budget.
budget. Yep.
okay. And all in favor of the budget? And so that's 4 for, 0 against, 0 abstain.
Great. And then,
Okay,
13?
yep, Article 13, yep. So this is the revenues.
okay. All those in favor of the revenues, Article 13? Okay, 4, 0 against, and 0 abstain.
All right. And then the last one that you'll put a recommendation on is Article 14, which is the road article.
Road.
Okay, that is, okay. All
With
those
that,
in favor?
with that slight correction.
With
the
that slight
Hawthorne
correction.
Drive.
That's right.
So it doesn't even say part of, it just says.
Just, yeah, it's struck after
Just roll.
west.
Okay. So select board, all in favor? 4 for, 0 against, and 0 abstain.
Okay, great.
Okay,
So we'll update the draft
Okay.
and we'll
And then we'll come in
obviously.
and sign.
Yeah, we'll have to have you come in and sign because we'll have to make those edits. Also, we need the budget committee to meet to set their recommendations as well.
Okay.
And that'll be tomorrow night.
Thanks, everyone, for coming.
Thank you, everybody, yeah, wow.
Now we're getting to some really exciting things.
I was like,
which is why
they know when
everybody's
the,
leaving.
they know when the exciting stuff is
They were
over.
waiting for the GA warrant disbursement policy.
Now it's just the boring stuff, okay.
Yeah, now we're to a typical select board meeting.
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
Forgot about that stuff.
Okay, next action item is act on special GA warrant disbursement policy.
So it's an annual renewal of this policy that specifies effectively that the town is able to authorize warrants in a faster time period than might otherwise be because of the emergency nature of a GA, situation that we encounter. So by approving this allows that speed to happen. So that's all it is.
Okay.
I move
Do we
the
have a
board,
motion?
I move the board approve the special GA warrant disbursement policy as presented.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Okay. Next is act on quitclaim deed map T02 lot B01-001.
Where is that?
Timeshare.
Matters. I'm just
Is it
curious.
timeshare?
Timeshare.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it's
Does that help?
another salmon site.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I figured. So what are we giving up, $13?
That's about right, yeah.
It says, "The purpose of this deed is to release any interest the town may have acquired by reason of liens, unpaid taxes." All right, do we have a motion?
Yeah. I move the board approve the quitclaim deed map T02 lot B01-001 as presented.
Second.
All those in favor?
Yeah.
That does. Okay, and then we have another one. Act on quitclaim deed map T02 lot A16-020.
Same thing.
I'll make a motion.
Okay, go.
I'll do it this time. I move the board approve the quitclaim deed map T02 lot A16-020 as presented.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Okay.
Back.
Okay, now do we have a motion to move into executive session?
Any liaison reports or?
Oh, I'm sorry, you're right, on the agenda. Yeah, let's do
bag those.
liaison reports.
I don't have any.
What?
My group's not
Liaison
meeting.
reports.
What are those?
That's if you go to committee meetings,
Yeah,
talk
I
about what you
haven't.
heard.
I haven't done that.
I don't think I have much to report. Parks Committee is going to meet next Saturday for a work day down at Harbor Park, work on cleaning up Goodies Beach. I think that's it. Library Committee is going to be meeting. So, I think that's Legacy Rockport's continuing to work on the RES site with the idea of hiring, this is working with the Lesher Family Foundation, but hiring a program manager to have some summer activities happening at the park.
Sidewalks or Pathways Committee, I know we had a meeting of just the Rockport members, and they are supportive. There was not a unanimous thought about this sidewalk going up to the town office, but it was overall supported. But, yeah, not necessarily needing granite curbing and all that, but definitely to do the raised sidewalk and all that.
Oh, good. Okay.
I got nothing.
Okay.
EMS committee hasn't met?
I don't think they will.
No, I don't either.
We might need to find you some new jobs. Just what you need
I'm
more
good
to
right
do.
now, thanks.
Yeah, I'm sort of full up.
Yeah, I'm kind of full. Full up.
Is executive session our
Okay,
next thing?
yeah, do we have a motion to move into executive session? Let's see, do we adjourn, do we do anything to adjourn out of, or do we just
No,
move right
you'll
out?
just go
Okay.
right in and then,
Okay, do we have a motion?
I'd like to move that the board exit regular session to go into executive session for a discussion of a personnel matter pursuant to number 1 MRS Section 405, 6A.
Okay, second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Okay.